Okay. So hello everyone and welcome back to day 2 of Camp 2 of the Young SDG Innovators program. Thank you for joining us across all the various time zones again, and a warm welcome to the mentors and champions who are joining us as well. My name is Daria Naglick and I'm joined by my colleagues Steve Kusurski and Nada Dali, and we're joined by our fantastic facilitators Ian Lobo and Emma Oliver from Accenture, who will be taking you through the program's core concepts today. A quick housekeeping mention. Please add your company name next to your name currently in Zoom. This will add a level of clarity for everyone in the session, and it's really nice to actually speak to faces and knowing their names. Also, please keep your cameras on if possible. We really want to make sure that we have this really great atmosphere, and of course, we're always trying to um, uh, make sure that we have as much of your attention as possible. And it'd be really great if we could all have our cameras on throughout the day, including the breakout sessions. We're going to start today's session with an in-depth overview of the concepts introduced yesterday, and then we will have a live case study session featuring Nutrien, who will take us through how they've been directly addressing the SDGs and the journey they've taken to implement sustainability into their business models and core operations. The challenge definition process will build on the topics introduced yesterday and continue with defining your SDG challenge. In this session, innovators teams will be encouraged to narrow the scope of the definition of their challenge and gauge its ambition level. Teams will be looking at the scope of their challenge and how to determine the area of focus that the SDG challenge should deal with or consider. Innovators will also be introduced to the idea of benchmarking, which will help ensure that the SDG business challenge is sufficiently ambitious to bring breakthrough impact for the SDGs and explore what are considered baseline actions as well as leading actions on the SDGs. Building on the stakeholder engagement discussions from yesterday's session, teams will learn about how to actually engage stakeholders in order to help them define and validate their challenge ideas. The ideas, concepts, and inputs gathered over the course of this camp will be integrated to narrowing the focus of your business challenges and will be needed for the Challenge Lab, which will focus on shaping your SDG business challenge for breakthrough impact. I would now like to welcome Steve, who will take us through an overview of yesterday's session and some of the concepts and lessons learned in preparation for the day ahead.
Okay, thanks, Daria. And the day started off with the love the problem segment, whereas challenge identification was focused on finding and identifying your SDG business challenge. Challenge definition is about making sure that you understand the problem at its root. This requires an understanding of the problem, both from the perspective of the individuals who encounter this issue every day and from a systemic level as well. When thinking about the ecosystem in which your challenge exists, you have to factor in the business dynamics in and around your sector or industry, as well as your preferences and behavioral norms that are shaped by your industry or other forces. The end user is the person who is most impacted by the challenge that you have identified and stands has the most to gain socially, economically, or environmentally by you addressing the challenge. Whereas a systemic approach requires you to take a market lens to understand why the problem exists in the first place, but also the context in which the problem exists. You may find that you are addressing a common challenge, say, for example, the issue of lack of access to affordable clean energy, but the reasons behind it and the context in which people face this challenge could be dramatically different for others than you. Next, we covered stakeholders, which were defined as any group, individual, or institution that has an interest in your company's actions. Stakeholders may not necessarily be affected by your actions to have an interest. In other cases, stakeholders can be individuals or groups that can affect or influence your company's actions. Stakeholder consultation is important to understanding how your challenge sits within the context of your business environment and in society. Stakeholders will also help you identify the short and long-term direct and indirect impacts of your challenge. Stakeholder consultation should be ongoing throughout the development of your challenge and solution. Next, for when we did the business model segment, I'm going to paste in chat here a file that covers the 6 types of business models. I think a couple innovators weren't sure where to access this information, but for future reference, it's in the pre-reading material from the Innovators Lab site. You can find under the challenge definition section, but there it is as a share link for you to hold on to as reference. When we discussed breakthrough leadership, That involves businesses identifying potential customer segments, experiencing real world problems and unmet needs. So that's like the status quo is change as usual, a personalized product or service where products and services are better tailored to customers' individual and immediate needs. And technology is often leveraged to achieve this at a competitive price. And then there's future quo, which is looking at breakthroughs, where there's a personalized product or service that is not just serving existing customers, but also potential customer segments experiencing real world problems and unmet needs flagged by the SDGs. This also includes recognizing and addressing customers not just as individuals, but also as parts of families, communities, cultures, cities, and ultimately the biosphere. Then when we did the defining breakthroughs for the SDGs segment, we finished up the day with a Q&A with Nate Schumann from Hatch Engineering. He answered a lot of questions for us and emphasized a few standout things from his experience, including the importance of being okay with discomfort and opening yourself to potential criticism while in the early stages of identifying and defining your challenge. Turns out that's a perfectly normal thing to experience. He also shared that once you get the ball rolling, you may actually need to rein in ideas so as to not overextend or stray too far from what you are actually able to do. He went over the importance in connecting with each other. You can learn a lot from your peers in different industries through suggestions and ideas that you may otherwise never consider, which is something we have been trying to facilitate with these breakout room company pairings at times, and we'll look into other ways to do it. Using your company core values is one of the best ways when seeking the green light from your champion or higher ups to do so, because it often holds them to their own statements and ideals. The financial incentive is also important to uncover, however, too, on the other hand. If you manage to focus on an idea that makes sense from this and a sustainability angle, you may not even need to consider the altruistic side or motivator behind your challenge, as it can already be baked in if you do it right. Nate provided a lot of great answers yesterday. So keep in mind to think of some potential questions again that you'd like to ask during the presentation when our speaker from Nutrien gives her presentation that we have today as well, please. And with that said, we're going to try the poll. We're going to mess around with the poll again because I think it was good yesterday. So I'm going to pop this up on your screen. First question, I'm just curious about overall comfort level going into the lab. And we're also curious as well about if there's certain categories you want us to address, like for additional support to help you out with defining your challenge and moving into solutions. So I'll leave this open for about a minute or so. Okay, we still have a few more people joining in. But we can look at the poll results. Share results. Okay, really good. Comfort levels. I was worried that things would be on fire for a few of you, but no, it seems we have a fairly confident group overall, and that's good to see. And then
fantastic. And just one comment, I love that point. You're just reading my mind around the more supplemental reading material, you know, because as we talked about that, there's so much content. Steve, is it possible if I start like pinging some of the window in the windows, some of the links, can we kind of extract that content and put it on the YSIP group, or just thinking for reports and stuff that might be out there that could be interesting for folks for further reading?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think like we really should be doing that. And it seems that Innovators agree as well by their answers here. I think we should like up engagement in that way and like have it there for reference. Totally. And yeah, that's a pretty interesting answer spread for the second question. It seems that maybe a bit more of everything would be appreciated. We have Nada now on our team who you all met yesterday, who will be helping us out with this too. So we'll have extra capacity now to up engagement with you through the lab and facilitate things like, yeah, more connection with the other innovator teams. I think that yesterday showed by a lot of your questions for Nate that it would be appreciated if we could maybe get more connection with particularly the US network, maybe their past cohort, and they have a current one as well, which may have some overlap from last year's, but also new companies too. And I'm sure there's a lot of companies in the same industry as you who you might want to you might want to talk to, and we can look into ways to increase that engagement after the, like as early as next week, basically. I think that would be helpful, and it seems from the answers here you think so as well. And then more supplementary reading material and support, we can absolutely look into that. You've heard Ian say a lot of times now that whenever there's like a bullet point on something, there's actually like books and PhDs on the topic. So like I think it really is as much time as you want to put into this, you can probably, like, it's the Marianas Trench, right? You just keep going until like you never stop learning. So I don't think that would be too difficult to provide more as well. And maybe Ian, you and Emma could help us out with like guiding us through that part as far as what type of supplementary material the innovators should look at for the stage, so that they so that it's a little more focused. And
yeah, absolutely. And that's terrific. Now, I just kind of sent a few links in, and happy to share other stuff kind of both on the Innovators Lab and beyond. I'll just give you a quick kind of whistle stop of a couple of the posts as well. And then Yama, it sounds like some great content in there. The Rockefeller Foundation, I know I joined a couple of groups. We're talking about telcos as well as community electrification. So that's one of the reports, program we've been doing with the Rockefeller Foundation since I think about 2015 or even earlier, or actually earlier than that, around partnering with telecom companies and their base stations for the transition to renewable energies, and then powering some of the sites. So that's one of the pieces, some of the inspiration of what's been going on. A bit dated, but still, there's a lot of evolution in that space. Last camp, we talked a lot about technology. Since then, we launched, every year we do the Accenture technology trends, which are what's new in tech, what's coming up and beyond. So that might inspire, this is beyond blockchain. We're talking about all the both latest technologies as well as business models that could be interesting. So that's there for you. And then always a good fun read. I think we talked about this last time, but the Fjord Trends, which is kind of more on the experience design, future of customer, and what's very, very interesting from the Fjord side, especially as we're looking from the SDGs. Mark Curtis, who runs the group, he's kind of a social innovator through and through. That's started one of the biggest design agencies in the world, and he's so passionate about the social impact. So you'll always see a lot of weaving in of the social themes into what's happening in the design world and how you can transform the services you give to your customers. And yeah, that's just a big starter for 10. And then there's dozens more things, which I'll keep kind of, feeding through. But, just Yalma, do you want to talk about the document you shared?
Hi, yeah, sure. This just came, I think, yesterday or the day before. It's a Vision 2050, which builds up on the 2030 agenda. Has lots of great content for companies, which I found it very interesting. I'm still reading it. It's a big document, but it's very interesting.
Awesome. Yeah, and I think even it's what is kind of cool about the space, and I know it's intimidating, is there's a lot of great content out there. It's just kind of curated in so many different places. And, as we've seen kind of a variety of issues and topics, What's really exciting is each of you go on your journeys as you're getting content. If you can feed back into the central intelligence, then we can disseminate it out to the teams as well, so that we're all going to be on that same learning journey. I think that would be fantastic.
Yeah, and I especially like that you both had examples in mind too for that. I think that helps with learning too, like having like having like an actual like a story to associate the concept with helps with like retaining a lot of this. So yeah, and like I really appreciate the links you've been putting into the chat, Yama. Thanks. Okay, at this point, maybe I'll hand it back to you, Daria.
Oh, I was on mute. Thanks, Steve. I really appreciate it. Okay, wonderful, everyone. So we're now moving on to our live case study session, which will be featuring Nutrien. I'd like to welcome Lindsay Verhage, Sustainability Initiatives and Reporting Manager, to share with us their story and sustainability journey. Welcome, Lindsay.
Good morning, everybody. Oh, it's so nice to see your faces. I haven't had my coffee or my breakfast yet this morning, so I hope that I am coherent, and I know I'm a fast talker, so this is super informal. At any time, jump in, raise your hand, give me a thumbs up, chat with me in the sidebar. I'm open to discussion throughout this. So I'm going to share my screen to kick this off. First, you're going to see your faces because I haven't dragged over my computer. I have 2 monitors. Okay, can everybody see a little boy getting some grain handed to him?
Yep.
Perfect. So I was asked today to talk about our journey in implementing a sustainable business model. This is a presentation I've never given before, so I'm going to do my best, but again, informal conversation here, so jump in if you have questions. I feel like there's so much I could share. It could be a university course, but we only have an hour today. So a little bit about who I am. My title, my official title, is Sustainability Initiatives and Reporting Manager for Nutrien. I am an Aggie, so I grew up in agriculture. My family has ranched for about 100 years in southern Alberta. I have a little boy, and we are very active as a family. So we love the outdoors. This is us during COVID. We've still taken advantage, of exploring the mountains and riding horses. So in the chat, only if you're comfortable, I want to learn a little bit more about who's on this call today. So if you could share your province, maybe your company name, and your industry. So for me, it's Alberta, it's Nutrien, and it's agriculture. So I'm going to try to monitor the chat on the side here as we go. Again, only if you're comfortable, and I think you guys can all chat through. Yeah, perfect. Okay, great. We got our first one from Ontario. A few of you from Ontario. That's great. Okay, so give me a thumbs up if you know who Nutrien is. And I don't know, actually, I don't know if I can see. Okay, I've got a few. I can't see everybody on the call right now. Perfect. So for those that don't know who we are, I'm just going to give a high level overview right now. You know what? You guys can probably see this right now, can't you? That's distracting. Oh, you can. So sorry. Okay, here, I'll minimize it. That means I won't be able to see you guys, but then at least you're not looking at your own faces. Okay. So who is Nutrien? We merged in 2018 between 2 Canadian companies, Agrium and Potash Corp. So Nutrien is now the world's largest provider of crop inputs and services. What that really means is we provide plant nutrients, primarily nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. And we also work on retail services. So we're one of the largest retail operators working directly with growers. We have about 500,000 growers across the globe that we work with on products, practices, and digital technology to increase their crop yields. So we always say from the bottom of the mine to the top of the silos, our employees are helping feed the world. There's about 23,000 of us operating in 13 countries, but we are proudly Canadian. So our headquarters are in Saskatoon, and we have another head office in Calgary as well. So we have 10 billion reasons why we do what we do. We know by the year 2050, there's going to be an estimated 10 billion people to feed. And when we talk about food, we also have to remember agriculture is responsible for food, fiber, and billions of byproducts that we use every day. And we have to do all of this on the same amount or less land, respecting our natural resources. So we have a really big ambition to sustainably feed the world. optimizing those crop inputs, increasing those crop yields, while maintaining a positive nature, positive solution. So that's really core to this discussion. It's also really important that we ensure everybody feels welcome to join agriculture. So I Googled quickly a sustainable business model. What am I talking about today? And I came up with this definition, and it was just like a no-brainer to me. This is exactly what we do as a company. So sustainable business model can be defined, that we create value, we capture value from our stakeholders without depleting the natural economic or social capital it relies on. 100% agree. That is Nutrien. We're always striving to balance our social, economic, and environmental footprint. So then I thought, okay, what are the components that are important to me? And I built this cake, and I was clearly hungry. I did this last night, but I built it as a cake because the core to a sustainable business model to me is the foundations of what your company stands for. So that's your integrity, that's your ethics, your human rights, your safety. These are table stakes. These are non-negotiable. And Nutrien thrives in this space. So the second part of my cake is my strategy. So this is our sustainability strategy. We're very ambitious as a company. I wish I could share our 2030 commitments that we're going to be releasing on April 7th. But it sounds like you guys are going to be sharing more resources. So on April 7th, I will make sure that your group gets a copy of our 2030 commitments. We are also launching some strategic ESG, environmental, social, and governance risk and opportunities. So all of those are grouped into this beautiful package and report that really drives the direction that we're going. And then governance is critical. So if you want a sustainable business model, you need a top-down and you need a bottom-up approach. You need to make sure that your CEOs and your executive leadership understand your sustainability strategy. That sustainability strategy has to drive your corporate strategy. We're so fortunate to have such strong leadership. We actually have an SDG champion in our company. Her name is Candice Lang, and she's the VP of Sustainability and Stakeholder Relations. And we just launched a new Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Center of Excellence. So we just hired a new VP. So that's incredible for our company. ESG Governance Committee started in 2020 as well. So, that's a big feat for us. These are all new initiatives. An integrated approach, I would say, isn't new. We've never operated entirely in silos, but there was always the sustainability team. Now, I honestly feel like sustainability is integrated across our entire company. So it's part of individual KPIs that are driving those ESG targets and our 2030 commitments when they roll out. They'll be rewarded for the positive actions that drive our strategy. So true integration, it's not an easy process, but it's very important to Nutrien that we do have an integrated approach so that we get uptake from the top and from the bottom. And it sounds like you guys talked about yesterday, that stakeholder engagement and materiality assessment, really core for us to always monitor what our internal stakeholders, so our employees, our board, and our external stakeholders, whether it's charities, governments, community groups that we're working with, what do they need from us as a company? Are we delivering? Are we transparent in our progress? So the top of my cake would be that we are a purpose-driven culture. Employees want to work for a company doing good. I know I do. I choose to work for Nutrien, and I fully support them as a company because of that strong leadership, the culture that they have. This is kind of an interesting stat, but during COVID, we didn't let go of any employees. I think that speaks volumes to our company. We were an essential service, are an essential service during this pandemic, and we didn't let go of any employees. Our company really takes care of those that work for them. And so the icing on the cake to me is the SDGs. That's what unites all of us on this call, all of us in the company. It's what we strive for. It's our Northern Star. So I threw it all together in a little summary slide because, again, I'm such a fast talker, but it really is that icing on the cake, that top strategy of the SDGs and the bottom of the cake of our foundations as a company and how they all come together to build that sustainable business model. So I thought I'd throw down our purpose in case anybody wasn't sure what it was, and it is to grow our world from the ground up. So our core values, safety, integrity. We engage with principles of inclusion, performance, community, and innovation. So when the SDGs first came out, I think we did what every company does. We looked at them and we did a beautiful icon mapping exercise. So we're like, well, this is a really nice one. This definitely speaks to us. Let's throw it down on our website. I would say that in a maturity model of, adopting the SDGs, that's kind of level 1. That's your base. But now, as we've progressed to understand what the SDGs are and how we can truly impact them, we formed an internal SDG committee. So it's internal experts, people interested in the SDGs. The first thing that we did was a review project. So we dove into all of the indicators for the SDGs. So we read 169 of them and we evaluated them. We wanted to make sure that we were selecting the SDGs that were important to our stakeholders. We needed to make sure too that we understood our baseline. So where were we at? We knew, okay, we narrowed down our important stakeholder or our important SDGs by priority, aligned with our strategy. And then we did a baseline assessment. Where were we at? Then we decided, where do we want to be? So in April 7th, when we roll out our commitments, our targets, and our goals, you'll see perfect alignment with those to drive the SDG indicator. And then the next phase of this will be, how will we achieve it? So the accountability, do we have people in place? Do we have action plans in place? What initiatives are we going to support? We need to make sure that we're constantly evaluating for continuous improvement. And then, of course, reporting and communicating our efforts. So it's a process, it's a journey. So if you could give me a thumbs up or in the chat, maybe in the chat actually, because I can't see all the panels now that I minimized you. So if you want to guess what is the most important SDG to Nutrien, just put a quick ping in the chat box because I do have the chat box open. Yay, somebody said 2. It is 2. So of course we ripple through many of the SDGs, but the most important one to us is zero hunger. And from an agricultural company, we dove right down to that indicator level of 2.4.1. And that is sustainable and productive agriculture driving zero hunger. So ensuring that the crops that we grow are grown with nature positive solutions and that we're increasing crop yields sustainably. Excellent guess. I wish we were in person so that I could give you a prize next time. So in the chat, again, if you're comfortable sharing, I want to hear what SDG is the most important to you. Which ones you just love? To me, I love 2. 2 is what, it's my background, it's what I grew up with, it's what I currently have focused my career on. So throw in the chat box, let other people know which one appeals the most to you. We've got a 10, reducing inequalities. That's great. 17 is incredibly important to me too. It's that foundation of collaboration. So I thought I would just explain a little bit about how Nutrien delivers on SDG 2. So I don't want this to be a commercial about who we are and what we do, but it's the essential of everything a grower needs. It's your products. So your fertilizer, your seed, integrated pest management, it's your best management practices. So it's ensuring that those products are applied properly with environmental farm plans. And then it's services. So it's soil testing, it's digital technology, it's providing that historical data. Agriculture is so modern and so advanced, and I often think that people don't understand that, especially when I see a commercial come out and they've depicted a farmer in the traditional bib overalls and wheat in his mouth. And I think, oh man, people are missing how advanced agriculture is. Probably our fault for not doing a better job communicating. This is a story of collaboration. So SDG 17. So the 4R nutrient system is a science-based approach to applying nutrients to the fields. This is a system that's globally adopted, that Nutrien worked on with industry experts and nonprofit organizations, and it's about applying your crop nutrients at the right time of the year, the right place in the field, the right amount. Too little is actually just as bad as too much, and the right source. So you need to understand exactly what your crop needs for nutrients, and you need to know what your soil needs, what it might be lacking. So it's a science-based approach. So we took this for our nutrient stewardship system. And when the Millennium Promise Goals were launched in 2000, so they were actually, the SDGs were formed, in my view, they were formed from the Millennium Promise Goals. So we supported the Millennium Promise Goals in 2000, and we used this concept of 4R nutrient stewardship to work with partners through Millennium Promise in villages in Africa. And we saw incredible results when we started to use their technology, what their land could produce, but we used science. So we educated growers on best management practices, and we were doubling, if not tripling, crop yields. So when the SDGs launched in 2015, we rallied all of the case study data and everything that we could find. And of course, we were doing this in collaboration with so many other players. And we approached the government of Canada with our industry, with our nonprofits, and with our partners already in Africa. And we were able to get $17 million to help 80,000 smallholders in Africa. And this program is still continuing today. So sustainable development really starts on the farm, but it depends on that knowledge to grow the seed. And it creates this beautiful ripple effect. And I'm going to show you what a ripple effect is later, but just keep that in mind that, when we talk about agriculture, it impacts so many different parts of someone's life if they can truly be successful and sustainable. So when we talk about this sustainable business model, it came to mind that we need proof of concept. In the past, sustainability, maybe wasn't taken as serious, the sustainability department, if they were storytelling, if they were greenwashing, if the report they put out was roses and sunshine and it wasn't truly transparent or reporting on progress of how the company was doing. So we want to stay away from that. In our sustainability journeys, we want to make sure that we are showing real impact that a company can prove. Transparent disclosures on ESG and the SDGs are crucial. These disclosures are going to be critically reviewed. We honestly believe that the Security Exchange Commission, which is an American-based kind of auditor, I would say, that they will be looking and vetting for investors the disclosures that you put out for your SDGs. So we need to make sure that sustainability information is being treated just like financial information, that there's regulatory bodies vetting the content, and it's going to ultimately influence your reputation and your brand. So we strive, our approach is to do pilot sustainability commitments before launching in scale. So when you see our 2030 commitments come out on April 7th, a big component of that is make sure that we pilot it. And one is actually already been announced. So I'm going to share that example with you. It's called our Nutrient Carbon Program. So in our Nutrient Carbon Program that was launched in, I think it was November, we are going to be working directly with our growers in a pilot. Again, I think it's mostly North American growers, but there's 2 in Australia. So we're going to be working with those growers to increase soil carbon sequestration, something that they already do, but we're going to make sure that we're measuring and tracking and being able to verify carbon emission reductions. And once we can verify them and we can track them in our digital tool, then we can help with the transaction of the sale of carbon credits. So bringing another source of income to those growers. So again, we're trialing it. We're doing those pilots. We're making sure it works. We trial about 100 new opportunities annually at our company. So we trial them, we evaluate them, and then we launch and scale. So we use our network, our value chain, and we make sure that we do our best to communicate and roll those programs out. So the importance of sustainability to me has always been important. It's always been a part of my daily life. Growing up on the ranch, like I said, we've ranched for 100 years, farmed and ranched. 100 years, you can't do that without being sustainable. But I don't think sustainability was really a word that I grew up with. And when I reflected back on a sustainable business model, I thought about the evolution and the importance and how much we've grown as a human being. When I was in elementary, junior high, senior high school, we didn't even have recycling programs in our school. We didn't recycle anything. I think maybe pop bottles because we got money for them for our sports teams, but we certainly didn't compost. Now I fast forward to my little guy and the world that he's going to grow up in. And sustainability is, it's chatter over a family meal. You don't just throw your leftovers into the garbage can now, you compost, and a composting service might actually come to your driveway and pick up your green material. And same with your recyclables. These practices, these products, the technologies and services, there's such an evolution in the importance of sustainability now. And there's certainly more to come. But it's also changed the corporate landscape. So there's pressure from global watchdogs and investors. There's a united global agenda now. So obviously when the Paris Agreement came out, that got corporations talking. And soon in September, there's going to be the UN World Food Summit. And that's going to have action track items that will evolve and transform the agricultural industry. So this has brought a new level of education for executives on executing sustainable business models. It's also provided many reasons for mitigating risk. You know, it's that case study of why we need to be sustainable. It's more than just, to me, building a positive reputation and brand. It's also about retaining your employees and fostering that positive work culture and delivering on your company's purpose. And absolutely, you're getting a return on investment from being sustainable. So this is the resource that I'm going to share with you guys on April 7th. It's our impact assessment of the SDGs. And I want to say it's phase 1. We hope to do more and dive deeper, especially in our value chain, which I'll chat about in a second here. But first, in the chat box, can somebody throw down 2 SDGs that are connected together? So in other words, we can't achieve one without considering the impact on another. And I'll just give you a few seconds for whoever wants to throw into the chat box. Nobody knows any? Come on. Am I on mute? Can you hear me? Okay, woo, there we go. 12 and 13, 10 and 5. Oh yeah, absolutely. Couldn't agree more. 1 and 8. Nutrien takes a systems-based approach to transform our company and our industry. So we aren't just looking inside our gates. You know, when I said we're the world's largest plant nutrient company, we take that with responsibility that we have to transform our industry as well. So the 2 that I'm going to share that are really important to us are 2 and 13. So ending hunger and addressing climate change. So when you look down at the indicator level, 13.2.1 talks about lowering our greenhouse gas emissions in a manner that does not threaten food production. So we as an industry need to respect and understand the role that agriculture plays in feeding our world sustainably, but also reducing climate emissions. And soils are actually the largest pool of carbon, soil sequestration. So huge opportunities if we're able to increase crop yields. I'm going to attempt to show you guys a little video that I have queued up here.
In 2015, the world came together to identify some of the greatest challenges of our time and have set 17 goals called the Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs, to solve them. The SDGs provide a framework that anyone can use to develop solutions together. These 17 goals are linked to each other in that progress in one area can lead to significant improvements in other areas. Agriculture is a great example of this interconnectivity. It has a clear and critical role in providing solutions to the first 2 goals: no poverty and zero hunger. We know that our population is increasing, but the amount of land we have to grow the food for our population is staying the same or even shrinking. So we need to produce more food on existing farmlands in order to support our growing population. It might be hard to see how achieving agriculture goals can lead to improvement in other ones. We can think about it this way. When farmers sustainably produce more food, they can sell the surplus to increase their income. We've already seen overwhelming evidence that when farmers have higher income and food security, it means greater access to education for their children, better health and well-being, and advances for gender equality. Using best management practices like the 4R nutrient stewardship system increases yield in existing land to support SDG 1 and 2. And these practices reduce nutrient losses to the environment. This can have a positive ripple effect on goals such as climate change, life on land, and life below water. We need to work together on this. The 17 SDGs represent the biggest global challenges of our time, but they also represent the world's most significant opportunity to help make the world a better place to live in, for everyone, everywhere.
I really hope everybody was able to hear that video. I got so nervous because I couldn't see you all.
Yeah, we were able to hear.
Oh, perfect. That's great. You never know in these Zoom meetings if I was the only one hearing it or not, but I'm really glad you guys were able to hear about the ripple effect in agriculture. So again, we take that collaborative approach with partners around the world. And I think that's important for a sustainable business model. It's that global thinking, but it's acting local and it's planning regionally. Oh, this is such an ugly slide, and I'm so sorry, but I had so much to say about our collaborative approach. So, collaboration, it's about sharing your information, pooling of your resources for generations for those systems-based solutions. So, for example, we work with multiple stakeholder partners. We have a really robust community relations and investment partnerships. We make sure that we're aware of our supply chain so that they're resilient and that we have shared values. And we also actively participate in benchmarking indices. So we have different indicators that we're constantly being asked to evaluate ourselves on. They're public disclosures, so our investors can get them. But what's really neat is that it's often a collective response from lots of people in our same industry. So we can pool and measure and track progress by being an active participant in these benchmarking indices. A value chain assessment is something that we have on the books to do. At a super high level, we looked at how we can mitigate negative impacts and strengthen our positive ones across our value chain, but we definitely need to dive deeper. I'm showing just a very quick example here. It's called Value Balancing Alliance. Nutrien's not a part of it yet because we haven't had capacity. It just launched, I think, in January. But if there's anybody on the call from BASF Canada, they're really instrumental in this Value Balancing Alliance. But the Value Balancing Alliance, from what I'm aware of, it wants to do exactly what we want to do. It wants to move away from this profit maximization to value optimization by taking responsibility for your actions. So VBA helps measure the value of corporate behavior and business models in real life so that you're translating environmental and social impacts into comparable financial data. So investors would be able to look at your environmental and social impacts just like they look at your financials every year. So it's something that we're not involved in yet, just because we were so busy with our ESG report right now and our 2030 commitment plan that we're compiling. But if you have anybody in the network from BASF Canada, definitely reach out to them if that's something that you think would be of interest to your company. So we're also working right now on an employee awareness and engagement campaign. So I think it's really critical. I said we have 23,000 employees that have an opportunity to make a positive impact. So some of those employees I mentioned would have it specifically as part of their KPIs. It's part of their performance reviews, but not necessarily everybody. And we need to make sure that sustainability is that lens that we're all looking through so that when we make decisions, business decisions, whether it's in human resources, whether it's in procurement, we want to always make sure that it's a sustainable choice for our company and for our industry. So it's always driving that purpose. We are currently writing an SDG and a sustainability employee education course with our learning and development system. So that's going to be launching in April. We're going to have a formal awareness and engagement campaign rollout in September. And we really want to ramp up that two-way communication. So listening to employees, engaging them, and increasing our communications on what we're doing for initiatives. There's two programs that I was actually acknowledged by Global Compact Network Canada as an SDG pioneer in 2019 for two programs that I worked with community partners around the world to build. So they're free, there's no ads, there's no in-app fees. These are truly youth education, unbiased programs. So schools around the world participate in Journey 2050. It's curriculum-based, teachers walk them through world food sustainability. The kids get to farm in Kenya, India, and Canada. We have real farmers portrayed throughout this program. And we have the SDGs as a large component in both Journey 2050 and then Farmers 2050. We found that the kids were going through Journey 2050 and there's an animated farm game in it. And they kept trying to go home at night and download it and play it. And it was never intended to be played at home because it was always a teacher-led experience. So we took that as an opportunity and we built Farmers 2050. So it's it competes on the open market for apps, just like Heyday and all of those other Farmvilles. But Farmers 2050 is based on real life. So this is based on real agricultural experiences. It's really fun. You get to grow crops and raise livestock and craft goods and trade with different countries. We have about, I think we're trying to hit about 1 million views right now. And as of 2017, we had 270,000, but gosh, that's grown. I think we're closer to 400,000 now. This is an outdated slide. But it's free. So we also included the SDGs into this. So we have real life challenges that'll happen in Farmers 2050. You know, when the UN Food Summit happens in September, we'll program that right into Farmers 2050, and we'll have an SDG challenge around it. So players around the globe can interact and learn more about what's happening in world food sustainability. And then we built another game called Global Hero. So Global Hero is 100% about the SDGs. So it's 17 fast-paced mini games that you get to play. It's free in the App Store and Google Play Store. And then the last resource that I wanted to share with the crew is, I'm not sure, maybe you guys have already experienced the SDG Academy. This was a really good starting place for me to dive deeper into those SDGs. So it's a free course. It's offered, I believe, through the Sustainable Development Solutions Network. So it's free. Like I said, you go in, you register, and you can click any of the SDGs and do an entire course, an academic course on it. But it's really interactive, really fun. So the last message before we go into our Q&A that I wanted to leave with is that, you know, leadership in the sustainable business development model can be led by anybody. It can be led by anybody at any level, as long as you're leading with heart. You know, we're all humans in the end. We're all here to live our own purpose. So I challenge you to figure out what your purpose is and how you can help advance your company. I'm going to throw my contact details in here. Feel free reaching out. My last name, boy, it's a beast. It's the whole alphabet. So feel free just reaching out to sustainability@nutrien.com, and that will get to me as well. Or take a screenshot. I'm sure my contact details will be circulated to your teams as well. But reach out anytime. You know, we cannot achieve the SDGs alone. So collaboration, new ideas, innovation is going to be critical for all of us. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen now, so that we're all back in the same room. This is much nicer.
Thank you so much.
And I will pass it. Yeah,
No,
you're welcome.
Thank you so much, Lindsay. I think that was a wonderful summary and overview about Nutrien's journey thus far and sort of your plans for the future. Anybody from the group that would like to ask questions? Let's definitely get the most out of Lindsay's time as we can.
Lindsay, I had a question.
Go ahead.
Oh, thanks. You mentioned that sort of like a link to pay for some team members, and I was just curious what those sustainability metrics are that I guess are on your scorecard or some other corporate metric.
You know, that's information that'll be disclosed on April 7th because but it's something that's really important. I think if you want responsibility and accountability for a sustainability strategy, you do need to compensate and link it to performance goals. So learn more on April 7th. It'll be in our ESG report and part of our disclosure with investors.
Thanks.
So, question on when you've been kind of getting started in a lot of these programs. We like to think that everybody wants to do great, to do great things and help each other and help the world. But what are some of the roadblocks that you've come up against, and how have you really challenged them and like overcome them?
So I think our biggest roadblocks were pre-merger. So before we merged Nutrien and Potash Corp, sustainability was important, but it was more siloed. But when we merged, it was this opportunity to evaluate everything from both companies. What was the best practices? What were your policies? Tons of meetings. Wow, did we meet. But it was quite a good discussion. We didn't always agree, but in the end, we were able to find the best practices, the best policies. And it really built up that culture too, that we weren't from a legacy, oh, I'm legacy Agrium, I'm legacy Potash. It was like, no, we're now Nutrien. So really establishing that we were a new company, that we could mold. It was wet cement. We could mold our company to be what we wanted. And when we got to be the size that we were, it was also an opportunity for us to get, at the time we got a chief sustainability officer and a vice president of sustainability. So we escalated the importance of sustainability right at the start of the merger. We built our purpose. So it was one of the very first things they did. It was like January 2018. We had just signed the agreement to merge, and they went crazy on building out our purpose, what we stood for. So I think that the challenges we had, almost had an opportunity knocking when we merged. And not everybody gets that opportunity, but we did, and we took full advantage of it to unite.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Lindsay, and amazing journey that you've both been on as an organization, and how it's permeated into the entire company and the way you work across so many countries. One of the biggest challenges we face a lot is keeping sustainability or SDGs on the corporate social responsibility side, and then versus really permeating into the business and having a strong business case of there is actually shareholder value as well, or there are business benefits. How have you been able to navigate that space around saying it's the right thing to do, but it also generates commercial returns for the company, so we need to kind of lean more into that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I mentioned we have an SDG champion at that top level. So we have a vice president who understands the SDGs. She went right down to those indicator levels with us. There, I would actually challenge that everybody on our executives, our board, well, probably even our board, knows what the SDGs are. So we have communicated with them the importance of it. We've had presentations about our sustainability strategy, and the SDGs are always one slide in that strategy deck, always. So linking to SDG 2, how we're driving it through sustainable agriculture, linking it to our purpose. So, that, appeals to so many different people in the company. That played a huge role. And then our ESG governance committee, they're responsible for the SDG, rollout. So that ESG governance committee is fairly new, but it has people from comms on there. We have the vice president of communications. So she read our SDG impact assessment. She, as part of the ESG governance committee, she had to go through, she had to read the entire thing, give her feedback. And then it engages somebody in her level to know we're rolling out a campaign that's going to increase awareness for employees, and she's on board. So it's really education. It's building it into slide decks and making sure people understand what they are. We have that short animated video so people understand the ripple effect, and it ties to the initiatives that we've got on the ground.
Right. And the CFO for the engagement on the financial side, where of course, I appreciate some of the metrics might be expanded, but a pretty sound proposition for the CFO as well.
Yeah, so we no longer have our chief sustainability officer. We now report into corporate development. During COVID, there was just a transition where we hired a new person that had to move from Europe, and it just didn't work because of COVID. So we now report into corporate development, which is actually pretty clever because now we're directly connected to the corporate strategy. I think for a value chain assessment, I mentioned that value balancing alliance, we need to do a better job of putting non-financial data, so our environmental and our social impact, and really gauging and showing that impact. And we're not quite there yet. It's on our radar. We know we need to go down that path, but it's complicated. That's not easy to go down that path. So it's on the books, but we know it's important to make sure that we can measure our impact, show our impact, and report on it.
I have a bit of a follow-up question on metrics and kind of leading versus lag indicators, because looking at kind of corporate responsibility reports, not just on kind of environmental data, but even like health and safety data, when you're looking at like lost time injury frequency rates and like health and safety metrics, they aren't necessarily great because they're all lagging. But maybe this will be answered in your report that will come out in April, but did it take a while to come to the conclusion of what those top 10 metrics should be for a kind of corporate KPI, almost that the whole company is working towards? Was that sort of a
yeah, it
difficult
was quite a
process?
journey. So I wouldn't say it was difficult because we had the right people in place. So we have one full-time person whose job is data. She works on our baseline data. She works on our definitions. She works on our systems for tracking, and she is across the company well known. So she writes our ESG report. She used to write our sustainability report. So she's critical in our journey to making sure that we have leading indicators. She educates people on that. As soon as somebody will try to set a target, she'll say, "Oh, wait 1 second. GRI is actually evaluating us on this metrics. It would be better if we actually tweak the language a little, and it would become a leading indicator." So she's really critical in our journey. Yes, we will be revealing more on April 7th, so you'll be able to see how we rolled it up. But part of that process was that stakeholder engagement and a materiality assessment. So understanding and evaluating our material topics, ranking them, level 1 being the most important, all the way to level 2 and level 3. Level 3 still incredibly important, but maybe not as significant as 1. So that was a really important exercise for us. We also have a team, and their entire job is risks and issues. So they are constantly monitoring mega trends in the industry. If nutrient is mentioned anywhere, they are on it. They know what's being said. So that's a really core component too of making sure that we're coming up with meaningful metrics and that we're sharing and disclosing what people need to hear. So the targets, I would say when you are able to read them in April, there's commitments, there's targets, and then there's goals. Because sometimes, we're not a company that's going to go out there and make a statement that we can't, just for marketing purposes, I guess. We want to make sure that the process and the plan is in place and that we understand where we're at. So some of them are goals to make sure we have our baseline data in place. And when we merged, that wasn't always the case. We had different definitions, we had different operating systems and tracking systems. So sometimes right now, even today, we have to just be aware of where we currently sit and be realistic about that. So even though we have big aspirations and we know where we want to go, sometimes the first step is pausing in an evaluation. And once you evaluate, then you can set a target.
Thanks.
Hi, Lindsay. I have a question. Jeff Danko from BASF Canada.
Woo! Yeah, I'm glad I gave you guys a shout out then.
Yeah,
Go to Jeff if you want to hear about VBA.
Yeah, well, maybe not yet, but it's certainly something that is triggering my curiosity. And let me know if this is obviously this is something, an initiative that you mentioned is new to you and that you're working towards and going to be partnering with BASF on. You also mentioned reference to the GRI, which is another common reporting framework, I guess, right, for EHD reporting. Mm-hmm. What's your understanding of the interplay of the two, and is one going to supersede the other? Mm-hmm. I know that's a main kind of challenge and the future of ESG reporting, it described as an alphabet soup of frameworks and no consensus going forward, and obviously that's step number one. So I'm just trying to wrap my head around where that's headed and where these two potentially frameworks are they converging? Are they working towards the same thing? What's your understanding of that and where it's headed?
Yeah, boy, it's a confusing alphabet soup of GRI, SASB. Oh, there's another one coming out called WBA, World Benchmarking Alliance. And I think, as a corporation, it is difficult to evaluate all of these benchmarks and frameworks and make sure that you're disclosing. Task Force on Climate Change is another one, TCFD. So it's not easy. You have to have a lot of internal resources dedicated to it. Not everybody can. VBA is, I feel, is different. VBA isn't benchmarking. It's not a framework. It's a collaboration to understand your impact in your value chain, the positives and the negatives, and to take your environmental and social data and try to put a financial value on it. So we haven't committed to VBA because we haven't had resources. to really explore it. And like I said, it just kicked off, but we really support the intent of what VBA is trying to accomplish. So I'd encourage you to reach out to Ravi or Amy
Mhm.
in your organization to learn more, because it really seems like a powerful methodology that they're trying to establish, because it's such a complicated tool. But it is, to me, it's separate from GRI. So you would almost use what VBA comes out with in the end. You would use those metrics and those tools to report through GRI and through
Mhm.
SASB what you're doing, what
So
you're
it's
measuring.
yeah, I guess it's a methodology that, helps turn these externality computes these externalities into something that would feed into whatever framework is going to come out as the leading one.
Yep, exactly.
Interesting. Thanks. Any other initiatives that obviously Nutrien and BSF are closely linked? Your biggest customer, we both support, the growers across Canada.
Mhm.
Are you, is BSF connected to any other of the initiatives that you kind of went through today?
That's a great question, and I don't think so. But I feel like there's so many opportunities opening up right now for BASF and Nutrien. So we'll see what the next year brings.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, there's a lot of open communication and mutual respect between the two companies.
For sure.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, Lindsay. I just want to jump in and ask if you can elaborate on something. So you had mentioned that Nutrien does about 100 or so various initiative trials each year, where you trial, evaluate, and then, if there's something tangible, you scale. This echoes a little bit about what we're trying to do in the YSIP program. Can you elaborate a little bit about that process for your team internally? What does it mean? How do you go about trialing these different initiatives? How do you evaluate them? How do you go about and decide which ones to scale? Just share a little bit more about that process with us if you can.
Boy, I wish I was on that team, but I'm not. So I will do my very best. I might even have to direct that back to the team and then have them answer. From what I understand, though, everything is about pilots. So working directly with the growers. I find that often when we talk about sustainability, it depends what end of the value chain you're on, but we set expectations on our others. So these pilots make sure that we're not setting unreasonable expectations, that we're actually working with them on the ground level to understand what their needs are. Piloting innovative technology has been a part of our basis. Gosh, I think I've been with the company for 12 years, and it's fundamental. They're always trying to come up with new businesses, startups that have new innovations. I don't know the exact process, to be honest, on how you submit the idea. You could look on nutrien.com, and I'm sure there's information. But there's teams dedicated just to innovation and tech, and working with those pilot programs to test, to make sure that it works. Continuous improvement is a huge part of that module, or that understanding that you're not always going to get it right, especially if you have something in theory and then you try to apply it in real life. In agriculture, there's just so many risks and things that can happen, whether it's weather or pests, and so you have to be conscious of those variables that are going to impact your innovation. But I think Nutrien's in a really beautiful place to scale and share. So we're one of the only people that works from end to end with growers. So right from mining and manufacturing those plant nutrients to on the ground with growers, and with such extensive reach across the globe, that launching and scaling is a huge component. And I'm speaking about the carbon program in reference to that, launching and scaling those comprehensive programs. But it's that proof of concept, I think, which is the most important part. Prove and then scale.
No,
It's good to be ambitious, but don't just throw out a marketing ploy of like, oh, we have this target, but we have no idea how we're going to get there.
No, thank you. Thank you for sharing. And if you can come back with anything from your team, I'd be happy to share it on our as supplementary reading materials in our Innovators Lab.
Great, I will.
So I'm kind of showing my background here because I'm with SED Compliance, but I'm very curious to understand how deep you go in the weeds of understanding your supply chain. So just a bit of context of that question, like what our product does is kind of get an idea of, what parts and chemicals are in the big machinery that you might use. So I understand you're tracking the supply chain of the product that you actually develop, but how deep do you go into the actual like machines and products that you use to achieve those goals?
That's another question I don't know the answer to. I wish I did, but I'm not on the supply chain team. But we have, I think, actually on their 2030 commitments that are going to roll out and our ESG targets, there is some that you'd be curious to read about related to the supply chain. It's so hard for me to decide right now what's public and what's not. To me, it's just so fresh. It's like, oh, does everybody know that? Or is that me just dreaming about it? But I can tell you, gosh, yeah, I'm pretty sure this isn't confidential. I can tell you that when COVID hit and we needed to make sure that we had a resilient supply chain, they do incredible. What I found out is they do incredible evaluations of our suppliers. So whether it's compliance, it's understanding their risks, it's understanding as well shared values. So I can't go further on shared values, but that's really important to us to make sure that we're aligned. Whether it's ethics or other fun things that you might read about when I release our report on April 7th. They tier our suppliers, they rank them. And then during COVID, they made sure that there was backup suppliers as well, so that there wouldn't be interruptions in the supply chain.
Cool.
Circular economy is something that we're probably just diving into a little deeper, that we maybe didn't do as deep in the past. But it's on the radar. There's lots of
after April 7th, I might take you up on chatting about it, because that sounds super interesting.
With the work you're doing sort of on the carbon credits and the carbon soil sequestration, are you working with external parties like research labs or universities or anything like that to sort of quantify your CO2 storage? Or is it all in-house?
No, it's a collaboration. It has to be. There's a lot of different people involved in those pilot programs. They have internal committees and they have external committees working directly with the growers. And obviously growers would be on the committee too. Research is a huge component of it. They do a lot of research under the University of Colorado on soil health that we've always paid a lot of attention to. And then we have in-house experts as well. Some of the smartest agronomists I've ever met sit on that carbon program pilot.
Cool.
They also work with conservation groups too. So this will be really revealed later, but in the report, but I think I can share just that, when we talk about soil carbon sequestration, we also talk about nature positive solutions. And so understanding the entire farm operation, so the impacts on water biodiversity are a big component of that pilot. So we're not just looking at we're not just looking at one SDG, we're not just looking at one issue, we're making sure we understand that whole picture and the influence on one over the other. So that's a part of the pilot too.
And how did you go about forming those relationships and partnerships with these kind of external experts, if you like? Did you approach them? Did they approach you? Kind of how did that come about?
Yeah, I think it's just, being in the industry for so long and our reputation. So we have partners that go back 20 years. We're very actively involved in different organizations, nonprofits, global organizations too. So, WBCSD, World Business Council for Sustainable Development. Those are organizations that we play an active role in. And when you play an active role and when you're active in the industry, then things happen. People come to you with ideas and innovations. And because, we're quite open and excited to be in this space, that, that's how these pilots form. We can't have the fun one-on-one in-person conferences anymore, but that doesn't mean that the work has stopped and that the connections aren't still there. Especially, I think this one's public. So at our Carsland site, we work with, this one would be a water pilot. So we did a watershed evaluation to determine that Carsland, Alberta was in a high risk watershed. So we wanted to make sure that our water use and impact to that watershed was positive. And then we were able to work with an oil and gas company that was next to us to use their water to do our processing. So recycling the water versus pulling it direct. So different case studies like that I think are really important. You know, just talking to those around you. You don't have to do it alone.
Yeah, that's cool.
Are those case studies available somewhere? Like, do you incorporate them as part of your like marketing collateral or anything?
Yeah, so nutrient.com doesn't do a great job communicating, I'll be quite frank. We're working on it. So most of the information will be updated in April 7th. You'll find those case studies in our ESG report. ESG reports are quite different than a sustainability report, though. They're geared to investors, so you don't have as many case studies. But you'll still see some of those in the report, which I'll share.
And another question, Lindsay, because from the YSIP program, the focus is really around young social innovators, of course, that might be early career or mid-career. For those on the call and other innovators that may not have that full C-suite support or kind of the level of maturity that Nutrien has, what advice would you give them that kind of coming in at the middle or more junior levels to really accelerate this agenda? What would some of their top priorities to be in order to kind of move the agenda along further within their own companies?
Yeah, that's a really great question. You know, I would always start with my immediate leader, making sure that you have connections to the business purpose, understanding that business case on why the SDGs are important and how you think they could help drive them. I know my leader was always open to me bringing ideas. So even before, like, you know, before the SDGs launched, we had the Millennium Promise Goals that I mentioned. So we had started Journey 2050 and Farmers 2050 shortly after, before the SDGs even existed. And those were ideas that I brought to my leader. And I said, you know what, here's our purpose, here's our strategy, here's my idea. Go in it with heart. You know, I mentioned at the end of my slide that it's about passion. If you believe in what you're doing, hopefully you can convince others. You know, you have to be respectful of budgets and, you know, strategy, what you're hired to do. But I would hope that you work for a company that's as open as ours to employees bringing in those innovative ideas. And then, you know, you being respectful of what your company is able to achieve. But I think I would start with my leader and then my team. So if my leader gave me the thumbs up, yeah, this is great, this is new information, then I would start with team presentations. So compiling, you know, 5-6 slides, 15 minutes, and just give a quick overview of what they are, and, you know, see if you could even start an internal SDG committee like we did. So it was just passionate people about the SDGs. Then we started with some internal comms. So a feed article, an email, an e-blast, or internal newsletters, and to get people to join the SDG committee. Then we got a little bit of budget. So then we made some videos. Well, what are the SDGs and how do we impact them? Then that committee could dive deeper as well into the indicators like we did. So figuring out exactly, not just that mapping exercise where we take the pretty icons and throw them on our website, but dive deeper, you know, and then your business case will start to form.
Fantastic advice. Thanks so much.
Okay. So to help prepare for the next session, we wanted to help engage your out-of-the-box thinking a little bit. And we came up with this creativity exercise. So it's pretty simple. We're going to imagine a standard household item such as a paperclip, as you can see here on the screen. I'm sure everyone has seen and used one at some point in their life. Steve will break you out into groups where we will have just 3 minutes to come up with as many different possible uses for a paperclip as you can. Please pick a breakout team lead. And then when the 3 minutes are up, we'll bring back everyone to the plenary, and you will be sharing your different uses and how many you came up with your team. So the teams are scrambled at random. You'll have exactly 3 minutes, and then we'll come back and we'll discuss. Okay? Steve, go ahead. Break us out into groups. Okay, so who would like to share first? So don't be shy. Just go ahead and share some of the you know, some of the thoughts that your team had and some of the different uses you could come up with for the paperclip. And we'll see how many similarities we have. We'll see, we're looking for originality to see how many different original uses we could come up for this paperclip.
Maybe I can go from team 5. So we came up with the various ways we can use it as a necklace. Maybe not a good one, but as other jewelry like earrings, as air clip, as opening locks sometimes, and as a bookmark.
Okay.
Various ways. Thank you.
Okay, no, that's pretty good. Okay. Next team.
I can go. We had some similar ones, but ones that were different was using it as like a paintbrush or decorator tool, like for really fine work, as a picture holder or ornament hook, for a zipper pull, or to tie two things together like a zip tie, and then popping out your SIM card in your phone.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, next team.
I'll go. We came up with some of the same, also using as a hairpiece, fidget relaxing tool, a conductor to test a battery with light bulb, a key to break into a door, dirt cleaner for small spaces like under your fingernails, used for art, can poke holes through paper when needed, draft work. Depending on the size, if it's a larger one, you can use it as a stir or a scraping tool to post plants and use to hang things.
Okay, wonderful. Next team. Do you have any more teams, Steve? Or is that?
Yep, there's yours and.
No, we went through mine.
Okay, then there's, I think, team 1 with David, Elena, Larissa, and Tori.
Anyone from team 1?
Maybe they were all on break.
Okay. Okay, great. So, well, if that's it, thank you, everyone, for participating. So a little bit about this exercise is, as you can see, we've all come up with really a wide variety of different uses than its intended purpose. So we can see that different groups have come up with different ideas. There's a lot of overlap between the groups, but we've also seen that we can be really flexible. So for example, when we came across, you know, the jewelry aspect, you could say, oh, we could have hair clips or rings or necklaces. So by going beyond that specific theme, we could see that there's a lot of flexibility in our answers. And so a lot of what we're talking about here can also be applied in the works that you're going to be doing in the next session, looking at how we can be very flexible with solutions that we come up with, right? Paperclip has one purpose. Anyone else in the world will tell you it's got one purpose, but we've now come up with at least, you know, 10 to 15 different ones that we probably wouldn't have thought of if we weren't forced to think about it. And so, yeah, and I think it's also great that a lot of you elaborated a little bit about the purpose. So we could see here that we didn't just say, hey, the paperclip can be used, you know, as art or for art purposes. We elaborated to say it can be used as a tool to decorate art pieces. So I think this is also important when you're coming up with a lot of different creativity elements to go beyond the general and try to elaborate as much as you can about the specific person, how you envision the purpose. It might be very different from how I've envisioned a more generic version of the purpose that you've elaborated on. So thanks to everyone for playing our little game. I hope it was fun. I'm sorry for those who didn't come back from break and you weren't able to participate. But I hope everyone is back now and we can definitely jump into the next session. I think that's over to you, Ian and Emma.
Perfect. I will take over the screen share here. Thanks for getting us ready for some more rapid ideation today.
It's a fun exercise. I hope everyone enjoyed it. We'll try to pepper in a bit some more creativity exercises in the future camps.
Perfect. All right. So can everybody see my screen here? Defining your SDG business challenge. Awesome. All right. So for today's exercise, I'll take us back to kind of what we've done so far. I know I wasn't a part, but looking through Camp 1 really focused on just understanding the SDGs, what they mean for businesses specifically, and looking at your individual companies, which are most relevant and meaningful. So really focused on kind of what they are, the business side. And then yesterday we started to look at it from the other side. So how are SDG challenges relevant and meaningful to society, both at the micro level, so understanding your user, and the systems level. I love that Lindsay emphasized the systems-based approach in her presentation as well. I think she had a quote on one of her slides that I wrote down: "We can't solve for one SDG without influencing others," which is super important. And we didn't ask her to put that in there, so it was great to hear. So today we're going to focus on putting those two parts together, looking at finding the market value for businesses and the social value for society, in order to develop a well-defined SDG business challenge. And I know most of the teams have a pretty good idea of where they're focusing in on, have started to get their thoughts down on what that is, but we're going to get a little bit more into the details, and going through this in 3 parts to define your SDG challenge. So we're going to be thinking about, and I'll just flip here, scope, ambition, and validation. So I'll talk a little bit about all of them. We'll share some videos from previous innovators to share how they approached these 3 kind of pieces. So hopefully you'll get some inspiration, and then we'll go through an activity where you can actually start to do some of this yourself. So starting with scope, and again, we'll go through kind of scoping, ambition, and then validation around your scope and ambition. Scoping the challenge is really the process of narrowing down the focus. So where are you as a team going to position your challenge? Hopefully from the last camp and yesterday, you'll have a high level understanding and at least some initial thoughts about, you know, which SDGs are most material to your company. And going through a scoping exercise, we'll start to answer more of the why those SDGs are relevant to your company, and then also providing some insight into how the company specifically impacts these SDGs and in what ways. So, you know, both negatively and positively. So a few questions on the slide here that you can ask yourself, and also actions to take away to determine the scope. And we'll think through some of this today, and then I encourage you to go in your own free time and in between the camps as well, and think about these a little bit further as well. So I'll call out, you know, when you're first thinking about scope, it's really helpful to have your company's mission or vision statement, and then also your company's sustainability strategy. So each company is a little bit different. Lindsay talked a bit about, you know, is there an ESG report or a sustainability report? And depending on your company, you might have both, one or the other. And they're both very important kind of documents to guide scoping. So the mission statement or vision of your company tends to be aspirational, and then the sustainability strategy is more specific, likely where you'll find your more kind of time-bound targets. And ultimately, we want to be thinking about how we can scope our challenges in a way that aligns to your company's goals and strategies. The other really interesting thing that a lot of sustainability reports will lay out is where your company sees concerns or potential risks in the future. So what we've also learned is that companies are more likely to invest in new ideas and innovations when it's presented as a threat or a risk rather than an opportunity. So for example, if you're going through your company's sustainability report, you might see a target on reducing water use in its process. And often targets like that might be because your company's identified, you know, relying on water in the way that they currently do might not be sustainable. And there's a risk that if that access to water goes away, your processes and your operations wouldn't be able to continue. So when you have goals like that, there's a good chance that you as innovators can bring this back to your company, to leadership, and they'd be open to hearing about those new innovative ideas about how to reduce water or remove its reliance on water. So I know we've talked a little bit in our panels and also in Nutrient session today about how do we get buy-in for this, and how can we convince our leaders and actually achieve something. And I think taking the route of understanding what your company has already decided in terms of goals and strategies and looking how you can help accelerate to achieving that is a really great way to narrow in your scope. So we're going to watch a video here from Team GSK from the 2019 YSIP program. So I'll do this here. Give me 1 second. I don't think I'm sharing my sound, so. Here we go. We're not going to watch the full hour of this, but start it around there. Okay.
Great, fantastic. So, hi everyone, welcome. My name's Carly Davis.
And I am David Basaga.
And we make up the GSK team representing the UK cohort. And we're going to spend the next 5 minutes taking you through our breakthrough innovation.
Thank you, Carly. And just to provide some context and background on GSK, we are a global healthcare company with 3 core global businesses where we discover, develop, and manufacture pharmaceutical medicines, vaccines, and consumer healthcare products. Our DNA is anchored in innovation by being science-led, performance in our processes, and trust, both from our employees and the patients our medicines touch. Overall, the purpose of GSK is to make people do more, feel better, and live longer. As part of this effort to ensure trust, GSK supports a wide range of programs, from researching treatments of diseases in the developing countries, such as tuberculosis, malaria, and HIV, ensuring a responsible pricing strategy and healthcare access, and by being absolutely committed to inclusion and diversity. Spanning across these 3 pillars, there is an ongoing commitment to reduce our environmental impact, particularly on plastics, that Carly will be talking on in the next few slides.
Great, so why focus on plastics? Well, did you know that 300 million tons of plastic are produced each year, and that this represents nearly the weight of humanity itself? And only 19.5% of this plastic actually recycled, which is a negative impact on the environment and public health, as it ends up in the world's oceans, swallowed by animals, and clogging up sewers, particularly against the backdrop of current events that emphasize the need to reconfigure the way humans operate in relation to the environment. It's really now more important than ever to ensure that we, as society, are taking the necessary steps to protect the world we live in. At GSK, the packaging of our products plays a really important role in delivering safe, stable, and efficacious products. However, we recognise the impact plastic packaging has on the environment. So we're working hard to reduce our plastic packaging, make it recyclable, and reduce our carbon emissions. And this work contributes to Goal 12 and 13. And where appropriate, we'll seek to establish meaningful partnerships to further this aim in accordance with Goal 17. And as we started on the YSIP programme, we asked ourselves, well, what more can we do to accelerate positive change within our organisation? And after engaging with our internal experts and through the catalytic effect of the YSIP programme, GSK is now developing an eco-design stage gate. The eco-design stage gate represents the introduction of a sustainability assessment into the new product introduction process to ensure recyclability and reusability of packaging materials. It really means that from the very outset, we're founding our packaging decisions on principles of sustainability. Initially, we'll pilot it on pills, in blister packaging, in bottles, with the potential and the intention to expand once proven to be effective. The ambition? that product level design decisions will better align with the principles of sustainability within GSK?
Okay, great. So this is an interesting example because I think when you think about a health and pharmaceutical company like GSK, ultimately their overall core business and mandate is having a good impact on SDG 3, so good health and well-being. But the team recognized that as a result of their product packaging, they also have an impact in a more negative sense on their use of plastics and contributing to some environmental plastic pollution. So they ended up defining the scope of their challenge around one of the pillars of GSK's sustainability strategy, which focused on reducing the company's environmental impact by a quarter by 2030. So that's one of those kind of specific time-bound targets that I was talking about that can help guide the scope of the challenge. And what was really helpful, I think, for them as they looked through is looking at the processes and systems that affected whether the company was going to achieve those environmental goals or not. And they saw a huge opportunity in product packaging. So they were able to define a specific challenge around that, helping achieve its sustainability objectives, but also catalyzing change in their industry. I think one of the great things when a big player in an industry makes a change like this, it encourages and incentivizes others too as well. So, beyond looking at their sustainability report and the goals there, the other thing that was helpful is narrowing in on scope was pinpointing that spot on the company value chain where they could impact a priority SDG. So it might not be their core mandate or what they would have gone in thinking about, but it's a good example of how mapping out a value chain and processes that your company goes through in its operations can actually identify those specific opportunities to mitigate negative impacts that your company is having or accentuate the positive ones that are already happening. So that's a little bit about scoping. And then next we'll talk about ambition. So when you kind of narrow into your scope, another key part of defining your SDG business challenge is ensuring it's ambitious enough that a solution would have what we've been talking about, this breakthrough impact, but also feasible to achieve and still relevant to your company's core business. It's kind of a delicate balance between those three things. And ultimately, ambition is a subjective term, right? So a 25% carbon emissions reduction for a small business with one office operating in one company will have a very different impact than a 25% carbon emissions reduction for a huge multinational company in several countries, hundreds of offices. And the actual feasibility of meeting that target will be very different from the small one office to the hundreds of offices. So thinking about right sizing our ambition as we define these challenges is really important. And luckily there have been a lot of experts working in this space already. Thinking about how we can guide companies on integrating the SDGs into their management practices. So what are those practices that we can actually implement operationally? And some of these practices have been defined regardless of sector, industry, size, where you're operating, to really help determine benchmarks for SDGs. So when I talk about SDG business benchmarks, they are a set of measurable actions for companies to take. And they can be a baseline. So thinking about what's the bare minimum on SDG 3, what should we no doubt be doing? I think about SDG 1, one of the benchmarks could be for SDG 1, poverty, paying employees a living wage, for example. And then going beyond the benchmarks, looking at those companies that are achieving well and beyond those baseline benchmarks can be a useful metric on the other side, like what is your best practice, blue sky thinking for really bringing breakthrough impact to that SDG challenge. Ultimately, when we talk about benchmarks, they should be applicable across all industries, but how you implement them can be adaptable. So as your company is defining goals and targets that are most material in your industry context, you can take that benchmark and understand, okay, how would we implement it? So we make sure we're meeting at least that baseline. And the other thing I'll call out here is it's important to note that ambitions and benchmarks are always changing. So something that might have been considered ambitious 10 years ago, best in class, you know, you're doing amazing, could end up being standard practice or even regulated a few years later, right? 10 years ago, 20 years ago, companies might not be reporting on sustainability practices or reporting on anything that's not financial. But now most companies do. So it's important to set your ambitions for current state context, and then be aware that you're likely going to have to reassess as you go through, and the state of the world changes. So in this slide, there are a couple key questions that can help you identify what you would need to push the ambition of your SDG challenge for breakthrough impact. And like I said, you know, what would make us a leader in this space? What are others doing? How can we uncover the whole ecosystem of our company versus just units or departments? Like Ian talked about yesterday, get rid of that silo. How can we collaborate beyond our industry and influence others to do the same? So we're going to be taking some actions in our exercise today to kind of explore what these benchmarks are, and how they can be applied to your company. But before that, I just wanted to highlight one previous team again. So 2019 YSIP team from Cisco, when they were thinking about ambition, I really loved their quote here and what they said their team motto was: if everyone agrees with what we are proposing, we aren't thinking big enough. Which is a great kind of mindset to have when you're thinking about breakthrough impact. So the team ended up centering their challenge on bridging the digital divide and increasing internet connectivity by an additional 1 billion users. So when they started to get into scoping it and setting their ambition, they had that big target. But when they further defined and responded to also the COVID-19 pandemic, the team ended up pivoting and refocusing on a target demographic group that was students in the United States who were currently disconnected from the internet, which was a huge number of students, I think over 10 million that, in the US that were left without internet connectivity during the COVID-19 pandemic. So they set their main ambition of their challenge to reach that target of 1 billion users, and then they further framed it within the context of targeting a specific vulnerable group, where they could end up piloting and testing out their challenge concept. Again, another kind of link back to an agile way of working, thinking about where you can test, fail quickly, pilot, get to the MVP, find your key lessons, and move forward. Okay, so the last piece here in our kind of three-part defining challenge is actually validating your challenge. So validating the scope and the ambition that you land on with stakeholders. The process of actually engaging multiple stakeholders is super important as you develop your challenge and continue to define it. Hopefully, you know, through mixed groups and this group, we have a chance to get stakeholders that you might not usually talk to. But when you start to form and have your challenge take shape, you're going to want to reach out to a few different types of stakeholders to test the challenge with them. That can challenge, you know, your assumptions or your biases, and help to refine that scope and ambition. So One thing that's really important here is remembering that when you go out and validate, it can often end up in pivoting, and that's fine. It goes back to failing quickly, being agile and iterative. So instead of going in looking to validate your scope, your ambition, your challenge, I encourage you to go into those stakeholder consultations with the intent to really listen and really learn. So, you know, avoiding leading questions and keeping questions open-ended. So really encouraging your stakeholders to challenge you if that's how they feel. And then also making sure you have a diversity of stakeholders when you're talking to. So you don't want to talk to only people within one department of your organization or only people that you know are going to agree with you. So make sure to engage with, you know, people that are impacted, influence, your users, people that are also working in this challenge space and people that aren't. And the one thing here, so some of you guys might have client-facing departments already. So when you're thinking about engaging with users, I always encourage you to go see what already exists. So maybe there's a customer service department or marketing department that's already tapping into your client and user base, and they often have a lot of great insights. So if you're going to understand your user that's already exists, see what's out there, see what your company already does. If you're trying to validate with a new client base or new market, that's when you can think outside the box. But even thinking about partnering with somebody that does engage with that client base or user base already, to connect with those users. So we'll do one more video here from Team Rotoplas from 2019, a leading water supplier in Mexico. So we'll get this at the right spot here.
Hello to everyone.
All right.
Well, then we're starting then. Hello, good morning, good evening. We are Team Rotoplas, Annette Vidver and Abraham Abraham. And we are going to present to you our water innovation platform. So we see two big issues regarding, and I think that, yeah, we see two big issues regarding water all over the world. The first one has to do with the demand, that the population is increasing, the uses of water are increasing, and the second one has to do with the supply side, where the availability of water has decreased over the past decades. This implies that in Latin America, more than 130 million people face a water-related problem. But these numbers, these statistics, are not just only plain numbers, but stories. Stories of people who daily face enormous challenges to deliver water for their household, for themselves, for their communities. So we want to talk about these challenges. We want to talk about these stories. And we care about it because we at Rotoplas have the purpose for people to have more and better water. So we do this through an innovation model and a sustainability strategy. Based on these pillars, we aim to deliver water solutions that improve the lives of these people. So this has been the results that we have had until 2019. The most relevant is that nowadays 1 million children have access to drinking water at schools. And we have impacted also 1.3 million through systems. But we know that maybe these results are good, but we want them to be better. This is why we have challenged ourselves as a company, and we phrase this challenge in a phrase like, how might we? So how might we connect water needs with appropriate water solutions in order to duplicate our impact for 2025?
And well, not only that, right? Because we're in a world that's constantly changing and it's more and more globally connected. And we know that nowadays the key for success and impact is through collaborative ways. So this is why we think that the answer to address this aspiration is through open innovation, because we know that it's the way to accelerate innovation, to combine external talent and innovation with internal capacities, connecting globally and providing solution to specific needs in regional countries. And well, we know that the innovation environment or ecosystem is composed by all of these actors that you can see here, from entrepreneurs, universities, research centers, accelerators, etc. And actually, Rotoplas has been already involved with all of these actors for the past years, but we think that we lack of an efficient way to articulate all of these actors to address specific water needs. So this is why we're really excited today to launch, and we launched this actually an hour ago, InWater, Innovation Water Impact. It's the Rotoplas Water Innovation Hub, which seeks to articulate or to connect water talent and innovation with water necessities in Mexico and Latam. What are you going to find in InWater? Well, two main things. The first one, it's going to be an international platform where we're going to launch challenges to address specific water needs in the region. And it's also going to be a space where we're going to be able to receive innovation and collaboration proposals from all of these actors. And
all right. So you might have noticed kind of the slide that I'm sharing here on the bottom left resembles one of the slides Ian talked through yesterday, thinking about who those stakeholders are. So it's really important to think through, you know, who your company already engages with, how they engage with those stakeholders. Could you do so in a different way? So already working in the water space, this team had a clear idea of who those players and stakeholders were, but it was through the engagement of them that they actually discovered the gaps and challenges of how they all work together and the efficiencies. So recognizing that and the impact it could have if they were to address those efficiencies, that was how the team ended up focusing and landing on this InWater as their solution and to the challenge that they defined. Okay, so we are going to get into some of this ourselves now. I'm going to stop talking very shortly, and we're actually going to go into some scoping, ambition setting, and stakeholder validation ourselves. So I'll walk you through kind of this three-part exercise that we're going to do, and then we're going to break out into our company teams as the last little bit before our lunch break. So I mentioned when we were talking about scoping, actually looking at your value chain and your company's value chain and mapping SDGs across it. So that's what we're going to do in this exercise and start to get a picture of kind of what looks like the illustration on the right. So it doesn't have to be super detailed. I'm sure you could go into a very, very nitty-gritty value chain, and at each step on the value chain, there's multiple impacts that the SDGs have. But rather just look at, okay, what's your high-level company value chain, especially the part of the business that you're operating in and thinking about for your challenge. And then start to map the SDGs that each step has an impact. So it could be negative, it could be positive. In the graphic that I'm sharing here, you can see the companies identified a couple. So one, the top kind of center one, SDG 8, at their company operations point in the value chain. You know, talking about we could increase our positive impact that we have on SDG 8 by providing a living wage to all employees at sites globally in company operations. On the other side, they identified a few SDGs that they could focus on to reduce the negative impact that their company is having right now. So one that I'll call out, SDG 6 here at the bottom right, thinking about how they can work with their suppliers to reduce water consumption in water-stressed regions. So it's something that at the kind of product use and distribution point they're getting into. So I'll put the link in the chat, but there's kind of a page in the SDG Compass Guide that has an overview of this and what it'll look like that can help give it another example. The second part of the exercise we'll be doing is around ambition setting. So we're going to look at what is the baseline and that kind of benchmark for break-even goals, what an ambitious action would be on that SDG, and what the leaders in this space are doing. And there are a few different resources and assets we can use for this. But ultimately, hopefully you've identified kind of those few priority SDGs to focus on. And we can look through, what actually would a benchmark look like. And I'll share my screen here just to share kind of what some of the resources look like. But one being Future Fit Business. So again, I'll post the link in the chat here, but looking first at what that benchmark is. So you can go down and actually find the SDG you are focusing on or prioritizing for your company. I know gender equality is one here. And this blue column here, you can actually see the benchmarks for it. And then on the right, you'll see the positive pursuits. So again, when we think, what's the benchmark, what's an action? And you can click into here and actually see the details too of what it really means and why it's needed and how it contributes as well. And then the last, and I'll actually share this too. Another good kind of guide to think through as we think about the SDGs and what the potential impacts could be. There are a few benchmarks here, so we'll send this along. And then the last one, what are leaders in this space doing? What's best practice? So we think about our benchmark, our baseline, that's the floor. What are some actions we can take? And then what is industry leading best practice? And so you can use the World Benchmarking Alliance here. They list out 2,000 most influential companies, so the SDG 2000. And if you scroll down, you can kind of see a list of all 2,000 companies. You can filter by what you want to focus on, your headquarter or region, and actually click in to see, okay, what are these companies doing? How are they ranking? And what are they doing on some of the benchmarks as well? So with all of that, I know it's a lot to kind of take in, but we're here to walk you through it. I'll ask that you guys bring up your activity templates again, because hopefully that'll make it a little easier versus actually going through and writing this all out on paper. But you'll be going through to fill out slides 5. So this kind of looks like your value chain and where the SDGs are. Slide 6. So again, those questions, your priority SDGs, that benchmark baseline, the ambitious action, and what leaders in the space are doing. And then finally, the last piece here is that stakeholder validation. So we obviously aren't going to go out and talk to people today, but what I'll ask you to do is refer back to one of those exercises we did in the first day yesterday around who are your stakeholders in this space. You might have the impact and the influence there, and then start developing some questions that you might actually want to ask them. And you can kind of use this as a guide to take out into the real world after. So we're going to take about 30 minutes to do this as a group, but before we jump in, are there any questions on this? And we'll be jumping around as well, so you'll have us in your groups if you do have any questions, but if not, then I will hand it over to Steve to pop us into our breakout groups. All right, so how did that go? Any initial reactions? Was it super challenging, super helpful? Anything you got stuck on?
Ours was a little challenging. Oh, sorry.
It's challenging. We feel that we need more time to think about it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Ours was challenging because we don't produce an actual like product that you can hold in your hand. Ours is more of it's a SaaS product as a service, right? So identifying like the points of sale was a little weird, or like the points of the product, because there is no end of life for us, right? It just is a continuous forever. So there is no, this now goes in the waste bin. Well, no, it's just we just support people. So identifying those points was very interesting.
Yeah, that's a good point. And hopefully I sent through the links for all of the kind of resources to use. So to your point, Kim, I know like 30 minutes is really tight to get through through 3 parts of this, but feel free to leverage those resources when you take this away and dig into it a little bit deeper. It's a lot of really great information, but a lot to read through.
Matt, now those links were sent through the chat?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, because I think we lose when we break out to the rooms, I think we lose sight of those sometimes. So I didn't see those come through.
Okay. Did anybody else see them? I put them to everyone, but okay, let me post again. Here.
Yeah, I don't think that cascades out to,
Okay.
it doesn't cascade out to the breakout rooms. So that's
Sorry about that. Well, I just put them in now. Yeah, feel free to leverage those going forward. Can everybody see them now? Okay, great. Any other challenges or anything anybody needed some clarification about as we were going through?
One question I raised was how it then relates to the one specific challenge that we identified. Like how does it come all together?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. So I guess hopefully if we're thinking about the value chain, ideally you start to identify those SDGs that you've prioritized as part of your challenge. It might help you narrow in. I know in our group, Katie and I had talked about reducing, so actually what were they? The SDG 12 and SDG 13, I believe. And so thinking about how you can actually narrow in, like climate action, what does that mean? And double clicking into some of those benchmarks and actions can help you kind of narrow in the scope. So whether it's environmental impact that you want to have and think about, it can help you get a little bit more actionable or tangible, and hopefully start to think about things that are a little bit feasible. And then in terms of, again, those, so thinking through the value chain, it might end up encouraging you to pivot to a different area as well. So that's one thing I do want to say is, you know, if you thought in Camp 1 that, yep, this is our challenge, this is the perfect SDG that tags along with it, there might be a point where you end up pivoting because you find some new information. So I guess in 2 ways. One, hopefully narrowing down the scope a little bit and starting to develop some tangible actions. And then 2, thinking about, okay, is there any new information now that would cause us to maybe reconsider or pivot how we're positioning our challenge? Did people find it helpful to start narrowing in, or did a lot of you find it started blowing it up a little bit?
Yeah, I think we were worried about it blowing up somewhat, because you can apply a lot of the SDGs to almost all parts of the value chain. So if we were quite happy with working on SDG number 12, and maybe if we just looked at 12 through the value chain, maybe more things would have came to light. But we were saying how 3 could apply, 15 could apply. It all can expand. So in the very short period of time, it almost looked like it was increasing as opposed to helping define.
Do people agree with that? Yeah.
I think in ours, we also just need more information. Like we're focusing right now on reduced inequality, but we don't know precisely how our hiring happens, and where there are resources to kind of expand into the engineering space more broadly. So like having to talk to key stakeholders and like identifying the business challenges and the individuals that are like directly kind of working on those is going to be kind of an integral part of that narrowing scope.
Yeah, no, that's great. And whether it's using the slide template here or another document to keep track of those questions that come up, when you're thinking about the value chain, maybe you have questions about the middle part or the end part that you don't know, and flagging those in the questions you should be asking stakeholders is definitely really important. And then David, to your point about blowing things up, I think that's a really good point. And I think it's super easy to blow it up if you start thinking about all 17 of the SDGs and the indicators. So I would encourage you to go through the process with your priority SDGs in mind, whether it's 1, 2, or 3, and do that value chain exercise with those in mind. And again, the benchmarks and actions, narrow it down to those 2 or 3 that you're focusing on, and digging in deeper to those. Hopefully that will help start to narrow it in.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thanks.
All right. Well, I think with all of that being said, we will take a break for lunch. If everybody's happy with that.
Hi, everyone. I hope everyone had a really good lunch. We're going to start now with our challenge lab around shaping your SDG business challenge through breakthrough impact. So over to you and Ian, Emma, if you'd like to take it over from here.
Perfect. All right. I will share my screen here.
Wonderful.
All right, can everybody see my challenge lab screen?
Yep.
Okay, great. Okay, so this one's going to be a little bit more interactive in terms of kind of going through the full next hour here, and then we're going to get together in our company huddles at the end of this, and then that'll be it for the day. So we're in the last little piece here. And so again, just a quick recap on kind of what we've already done and where this next exercise is positioned. You've had workshops focused on how to identify and understand the user at the heart of the challenge, and thinking about business model innovations that can be developed based on the SDG challenges. And I think Ian pinged the link to the book that he was sharing and had hugged when he found. So I definitely encourage you to check that out. But the purpose of this next exercise is to get you in the mindset of how to frame your challenge for breakthrough innovation. And I'll skip forward here. And so as you can see on the slide, breakthrough innovation is more than just technologies and business models. And ultimately, it starts with kind of the mindset and leadership. So one of the important things we want to kind of do today and over the next hours, just deepen our self-awareness about our own mindset in order to get to a place where you can identify and develop breakthrough innovations for your companies. So the following exercise will pose several questions about your company's innovation opportunities and challenges. And we'll be doing this kind of all together as individuals as well before coming back to your groups. So if we flip open the activity template, and everybody could get it up from on their own screen or kind of side of desk, this is kind of the slide we'll be using as we are going through this. And so you'll see we have a little bit of a matrix here, and you'll be using these sticky notes to answer questions. So if everybody's able to kind of pull that up and go through it on their own, then we'll be leveraging kind of some of the answers as you guys come back together and share in your company teams. So I'll flip back over here. All right, so like I said, what we'll be doing is going through these questions and then starting to plot our answers along the matrix. So when we go through the questions, you can write your answer on this slide down on one of the yellow sticky notes kind of on the side of that template, and then place them on the chart based on where you think it's appropriate in terms of how important that question is to business and then to society. So business across the top and society along the bottom. So kind of top left-hand corner of that matrix are questions that just aren't that important to business or society. And then the bottom right is really getting the heart of the issue of, you know, core business significance and huge impact to society. So that's how you can kind of read the matrix here. So we'll start off with avoiding risks and leveraging opportunities. And one of the websites I sent through earlier was the Future Fit Foundation. And they defined system value as a business that in no way hinders and ideally contributes to the possibility that humans and other life can flourish on Earth forever. So creating that system value means being environmentally restorative, socially just, and economically inclusive, which I thought was a good definition to kind of anchor this slide into. It's not sufficient just to be kind of creating positive impact in one small area of our business, but it's all about assessing the total impact of our business across all dimensions. And understanding that, you know, one company can't drive system change alone. It's about working with aggregators, suppliers, people that are your stakeholders across the ecosystem. So our three questions here: one, what are the areas of greatest risks to our business? So take some time and write down, you can write down one or more answers on the yellow stickies, and then plot it down where you think it's most important. So you might have one risk that is kind of most critical to the business, one that's a little bit more critical to society, thinking about the greatest risks. And we'll give everybody a couple minutes here. And while you're writing it down, feel free to jump off of mute, share your thoughts, any questions, what you're thinking about risk for your business might be.
Is the concept of systems change resonating for you all? Because any questions around that piece? Because sometimes I find it's a bit of a leap from a company or a department of a company to what is actually the broader system and what's involved in that, or is it tracking on? And also sometimes when we talk about systems, we might think of ecosystems and we might think about natural habitat and stuff like that, as opposed to the living companies, organizations, institutions such as the government, the interactions such as policy, all those things, how they fit together when we're talking about systems change. So not sure if there's any questions around systems change or any clarification we can give. Cool.
All right.
I guess I was going to say, I have a question. How does the systems change? Maybe I'm just making the jump, but how does the system change relate to the first question? What are the areas of greatest risk to our business?
Yeah, It's a great question. So when we think about risk to our business, usually it's risk that either one, other people have an impact on. So if we go back to the idea around, accessing water as part of your key process, I think I gave that earlier example. Your company can do everything you want to reduce the impact and reduce reliance on water, but ultimately, other people are going to have an impact on that as well. And if your company is facing that risk, there's a huge chance that other companies in your industry and in your geography are facing that as well. So one of the first steps is kind of identifying what are those key risks, and then extrapolating out to, will lead you into the next question, how do we work with cities, industry bodies, and cross-sector platforms to affect system change? And you can really think about that, who's impacting those risks? Who's being impacted by those risks? Is a good way to think about it.
So when we're doing our risk assessment, again, because we don't really produce a product per se, how in the weeds are we getting here? Because I could say, we use electricity in our office and to keep our servers on, or our focus is ensuring that women, BIPOC, and differently able people are in engineering spaces, but we're not removing critical minerals from the earth, but the servers that we use are made with critical minerals. So are we going that nitty gritty into, or the computers that we use, right? Are we going that nitty gritty into our risks, or how deep are we diving here?
Yeah, so I try to keep it focused to the topic of your SDG challenge, but I love the idea about getting nitty gritty. If it's environmental, if that's the challenge you're focusing on, and yeah, you're not the ones mining, you're not the ones actually procuring that, but then you're using it in your systems, it's definitely a risk. So I think that's I'll caveat to stay kind of on topic to your SDG challenge, but go as kind of far out one side or the other on your value chain as you want.
And when framing this, sometimes I really like to look at some of the unique strategic positioning that your organization could make a disproportionate impact against. So for instance, a company like Accenture, because we do so much in the technology space, no big surprise, we're really conscious about our carbon footprint when it comes to technology and hosting all the servers and beyond. That's one of the many elements. And because we also consult out to so many other companies, if we can make a dent in that for more environmentally friendly uses of technology, carbon neutrality, we could make such a disproportionate impact. So that's kind of one of the sides. So, if we're looking at inclusion and diversity on hiring, that might be where you've got some of your superpowers in a way that, despite being a smaller organization than some of the multi-billion, megacorps with hundreds of thousands of people, could you actually make a catalytic change within that space? And is there a space where you've got something unique as well, or you could develop something unique for that 10x factor that we talked a lot about around breakthrough innovation? So that's where I'd kind of frame it in, because of course you could take, some bits and bobs along for carbon reduction, for buying your IT, but you probably would create a bigger impact if you were transforming the sector to have more women and underrepresented groups available in the engineering marketplace.
We'll take a minute to answer the last question here. So how do our current advocacy and lobbying efforts engage the system change agenda? And I'll caveat here, when you're thinking about advocacy and lobbying efforts, maybe that's something that your company doesn't really participate in the topic of your SDG challenge right now. And that's super fair to say, maybe the answer is, well, not applicable at this current moment. But think about, if you wanted to encourage advocacy in this space, who would you start to engage with, and what would be your main points on when you actually go to them and say, this is what I want to change, how can you help me get there?
And to also maybe make it a bit easier, if we want to soften the advocacy and lobbying, because I know, of course, that seems a bit of a sharp, pointy stick of trying to get governments to put the policies that you want to achieve for your business outcomes. There's soft advocacy through even your marketing. What are you telling the market? What's that image? What's that purpose that you're putting out there? So if it doesn't work on the advocacy as a specific element of saying, you know, promoting the use of fossil fuels as a clean energy, it might be also, you know, how you're branding and positioning the company out there that might be, you know, counter narrative to some of the challenges. And so then there's the opportunity, of course, to, you know, reimagine and looking at some other elements around telling that story in a way that much would help to accelerate progress towards the SDGs.
All right, we'll move forward here and into turning liabilities into assets. So this one especially really ties back to the circular business model that we were talking about yesterday, our closed loop. And so I'll encourage you to kind of change to your next sticky note color, the pink one on the template here, so you can start to differentiate about which topic you're putting your answers to. But the first one, which flows are critical to our business? And when we talk about flow, you can think about it in terms of something that's intangible. So, you know, if it's not product-based, think about the things like knowledge, talent, your people, and then more tangible things like resources. And then as you're thinking through that, where in our business are linear models currently in use that could be turned into closed loops? So feel free to kind of flip back up to the business model section that we were talking about yesterday, and those ideas that you would put down in closed loop. You could start to populate them in here.
And Jacinta, I'll give you an example as well, because I know, of course, when we're looking at production companies, it's a bit easier. But if we're looking at the talent game, and again, this could apply to any of the companies, really focusing on loss and how do we capture, quote, value. So some of the lossage or seepage of loss would be, if we're looking at a more inclusive hiring policy, what's happening for the retention? So are we keeping the people? Are we promoting people of various backgrounds and beyond? Or is that a lot? So yes, we might get them in the door, but are they able to thrive and really be quite successful? So, you know, kind of thinking, I know it's kind of weird thinking about people's as values, but at the same time, it's how do you optimize the experience for them and then realize that, yes, it's hurting the individual that's leaving the company because they may not have found as potentially enabling or supportive environment that they would have wanted. But then, of course, going beyond that, how could the company take other actions to make sure that they are not even just becoming supporters, they can be advocates also out there of saying, yes, I love the firm. And this, you know, we're living our values, we're standing up beyond this. So that's kind of, you know, some of the ways on the human side where you can see value capture or additional opportunities for, you know, value capture or reducing value loss. That, of course, is a bit more ethereal versus, you know, waste from a production cycle.
I love that. It's such a good example too, because retention is so expensive. And you think of, if we're spending $1 million on retention every year because people are exiting out, versus closing the loop and retaining them. And like Ian said, putting them in the market to bring a positive brand, you can stop spending that $1 million on retention each year because you're keeping them and you're also helping them bring people in. or acquisition, I mean, yeah. And then the last question here, so which problematic outputs can be turned into valuable inputs? And I wanted to flag one of the examples my group had yesterday when we were talking about business models, was using land that was already disturbed and actually putting micro solar panels there to actually use it and delay that cost of reclamation. So I think it was Tori that was talking about that yesterday, which was a great idea, good example of this. We'll spend another minute or so here before flipping on to the next.
Yeah, and this is kind of where I love the concept of second life products, from waste to really the next stage of innovation for how do you use it in a different way. Doing a lot of work with there's no cohort here or company that represents that sector, but especially when we're looking at consumer goods companies and even the retailers. And as you can imagine, food retailers and supermarkets, you can imagine the amount of waste that's happening from food expiry dates and beyond, but linking into some biogas solutions and other innovative ways to transform the waste product of goods that aren't sold into second life, even in tangential industries like energy. So those are some of the ways also we're trying to look at these things. Or if you're in the tech industry, I'm sure you're already doing this like Intellis and others, but electronic waste, of course, is one of the biggest problems, especially as we need to buy our new phones every our planned obsolescence from what was it, the 70s. That became the hottest thing to drive capital markets is now our demise as a species, basically. So, how are we going to, find that electronic waste, the closed loop cycles? And again, it's not just about let's take your old phone and give it back to someone who has less means. It's how do we fundamentally reimagine like products for life or other kind of secondary uses for more robust ways of thinking. And that could also link into the pay-as-you-go model. Do we just get a perpetual license for the almost like leasing type services on products rather than the, of course, endless consumption, disposal, or throwing it in your basement?
All right. The next slide here is raising the ambition. So one thing here, I think in the breakthrough mindset session in the first camp, 10 times ambition is the practice of asking how to make a 10-time improvement rather than a 1% or a 10%. So thinking about, are we delivering that percent incremental change, or are we looking at that bigger breakthrough multiplicator to open up like a real different realm of possibility? So a couple questions here. Which teams or units within your business are typically driving or embracing new ideas? And I'll give an example here of a client that I've worked with within the government sector that's traditionally thought of, Crown Corporation, they don't like a lot of change, they don't want to do a lot of innovation, let's just kind of stick business as usual. They ended up creating an innovation group that has been a huge champion of bringing new ideas, whether it's through emerging technology, different kind of like innovative solutioning. So doing public challenges and outsourcing solutions. So thinking about maybe your company already has an innovation group or department, but maybe that's another group actually. Maybe it's kind of your digital team, maybe it's your sustainability team. So who do you see in your company that's often bringing forth these innovative new ideas? or at least open to receiving them. And then the second question here, what aspects of your business is most likely to benefit from that 10 times approach or similar? So thinking about, okay, where can we make a 10 times improvement rather than an incremental 1%? It's not always applicable in every scenario, but I think that that it's interesting to challenge yourself to think around, okay, where could we actually do that? I think the example on the slide is clothes made from plastics. You know, when you think about the fast fashion retailers, they often have their sustainable line or their eco line, and maybe it's 10% of their clothes. But instead of saying, okay, how can we make it 11%? Let's do the full 100. How do we drive that really breakthrough innovation? And then the last question here, what has been your company's most breakthrough innovation to date? And I know this might be challenging for people that are newer to their companies as well, but sometimes thinking about what attracted you to that company in the first place, right? Like when you were going through the recruiting process, were there things, really lofty goals or ambitions that your company has achieved and that drove you to wanting to work there in the first place? Or looking back to those teams or units that are always the ones pushing out new ideas and trying out new innovations. Is there anything that they've done recently that you were really impressed about? And I'd love to hear this one, actually, if anybody wants to come off of mute. Are there any really impressive kind of breakthrough innovations that you've seen your company take?
Ascent exists because of breakthrough technology. I mean, what we do is like being able to support companies in collecting information in their supply chain. So like, do they have lead? Are they diverse? Are they owned by women or people of color? Like that's literally everything that we do. So we touch on a lot of those different SDGs separately and together.
Mm.
For BASF, I'm sure they have inventions, but one that stood out to me, and I don't know if it's breakthrough or not, but they came up with a paint that reflects light, like heat and all that. And it doesn't sound like much, but it actually lowers the temperature of the electrical vehicles that they're making, and then the battery lasts longer. And I don't remember the percentages or anything like that, but it was 2 or 3 years ago they came up with this revolutionary paint. I thought it was really neat approach to just car paint.
Yeah, that's really cool. I know I'm reading Bill Gates' latest book, and he talks a lot about the capacity of batteries is like one of the most, one of the biggest barriers, right? So how long it can actually last for is very important. Awesome. Anybody else want to share here?
Another example that is topical for BSF is our entry into the digital farming landscape as it relates to our agricultural business. So we're kind of definitely making a push on that emerging technology to to help farmers use this use these technologies to optimize their use of enable the maximizing the yields of crops and targeted application of crop protection products. So using satellite imagery that farmers can utilize to target minimize the use of this crop applications exactly where they're needed, and that's a incredibly scalable technology that you can see it expanding on a similar path that cell phone technology has around the world.
Yeah, that's pretty incredible. It's also cool, I think, seeing how you can bring existing technology into your industry, right? Like the idea of using satellite technology or satellite imagery, which is used for so many different things. Okay, how can we use it in agriculture or another field? I think that's an excellent example of breakthrough innovation. All right. So our next topic here, thinking about disrupting the market or yourself. Are we disrupted or are we disrupting? So, self-disruption can be pretty risky when you think about, okay, how can we disrupt our internal businesses and operations? Because you're letting go of the business as usual existing practices, you're challenging assumptions that leadership teams have likely kind of held on to for many years. But there are definitely ways to, I think, continue executing core products, services, operations, while still bringing in new technologies and business models to experiment with. So our first question here is, where is disruption happening or likely to happen in our sector or in any tangential sectors as well? So what are you seeing kind of happen in the marketplace? Or what are you expecting to have happen in the marketplace in the next 3 to 5 years here? I think some of these questions are really important to start thinking about risk, both in the near term and the long term as well. What often we think about disruption as a disruptive technology or disruptive innovation, but sometimes it can be negative as well, right? Something that's happening that's outside of our core business or outside of what we're in control of, and disrupting what we're able to do or able to achieve. And then our second question, so again, going to the idea of disrupting yourself, are there elements of our existing core business that we need to let go in order to disrupt ourselves? Any old policies or processes? And then the last question here, what does the future of the industry look like? So again, this one's definitely future thinking, and we don't have all the answers here. I think a lot of answers to these questions are based on assumptions, but I'd love to hear again if anybody wants to come off mute and think and just talk a little bit about what's happening in their industry or internally around what's getting disrupted.
With COVID, we had prior to COVID, there was kind of a very firm, you are in the office and you work in the office and you don't work from home, and we don't hire outside of Ottawa culture. And then COVID happened. And so now we're all working from home. You know, half of our team members are, you know, all around the world. And that really disrupted the way we work and the tools that are at our disposal to work as well.
Yeah. And who you can hire changes then, right? Like you're not constrained to Ottawa, potentially.
Exactly, yeah.
So anybody else want to share here? Any fortune tellers want to share what they think the future of their industry might look like? Do you think you'll go back to the office at some point, Jacinta, or do you think you'll continue operating more remotely?
Well, seeing as like our CMO is in Colorado and my like various people in my team are across Canada, I don't think we're going back to the office in the way that we used to be in the office. So like, I don't think we'll all be working 9 to 5 in the office 5 days a week. And I think that that's going to offer a lot of really great opportunities for people who are, you know, disabled or require different tools. So like with Google Meets, you can have closed captions that are auto-generated. So what a great opportunity for people who are hard of hearing, right? Or like even myself, I have back issues that if I'm sitting for too long, I get like excruciating pain. And so being able to work from my couch is like the best thing and helps me provide value more consistently. So I think this change in atmosphere and this change in perception is going to be a very positive change for a lot of different groups, for sure.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And something that otherwise can't be provided, or you're waiting for your office to buy the couch that you can work on, right? Which
and the professionalism of working on a couch, because like I've done that before. People are like, what are you doing?
Well, that's awesome. What about anybody else? Anything that you foresee really disrupting or changing your industry in the next 3 to 5 years?
For us, I think it's for TELUS, it's technology. Either it's the 5G technology, the AI, the virtual reality, so everything related to technology.
Great.
For the chemical industry, it's probably adoption of emerging clean energy technologies and shifting, you know, these huge chemical manufacturing sites to clean electricity and clean hydrogen and away from fossil-based fuels. So huge technological challenges, but something that's coming in 5 to 10 years.
That's it.
Great. And one kind of grenade to throw into the mix is rethink your industries, because are you in telecoms, TELUS, or do you want to be in financial services?
Oh, you muted yourself, Ian.
Like Vodafone's doing, for instance, with the M-Pesa and other elements, you know, really driving that part of the business. TELUS Health, are you actually a healthcare service, and how are you competing in that? There's an old class.
No, you muted.
No, I'm trying to get this ping in the window. There's an old class from 5 years back. You know, Starbucks actually holds more deposits and cash in hand on their cards than many small banks. So they're actually becoming, you know, a very, very evolved other industry. So there's some of these elements, and again, I'm not just saying it to be provocative, but it's just as we're seeing so much fusion between industries and so much overlap, that we're seeing a breakdown of the silos. And we talked about the silos yesterday, which is how do we look at, you know, the collaborations cross industries that we've already seen. Why does climate matter to a chemicals company or a telco? Well, it does. And all of this thing about saying, if I'm a consumer goods company, I'm actually a water company as well. Or if I'm a chocolate bar maker, I'm in agriculture. And of course, that's an obvious one, but then also I might be an energy player. So there's so much of that kind of fusion that's happening in order to make the entire value chain happen, as well as a lot of these disruptive technologies that are coming through. So I would say, you know, as you kind of go forward maybe one moment there's going to step back and saying, let's look to the left to see what a very different industry might be doing in that space, and how we can adopt that solution and those ideas for what we're doing if we want to grow in that space.
That's a good point. All right, and so our last kind of series of questions here is around leadership. Are we managing or are we leading? So the first question here in your last color of sticky notes, are we solving a global challenge through any of our core businesses? So thinking about, how relevant your company is in addressing core issues that the world is facing today. Real market needs, and in the geography that you operate in, often are kind of market needs in the global world. So thinking through, what are those global challenges that your core businesses are starting to solve? And then the second question here actually is super relevant to what Ian was just saying. What are our blind spots? Are we missing opportunities because our frame of reference doesn't allow us to see them? So for somebody like a Starbucks that's going to start actually holding that much cash in their cards, what else can they do with it? Are they leveraging that in the right way? Are they thinking about how their users are interacting with the cash versus interacting just with the cup of coffee that they're getting as well? So thinking about, as your company, are there anything that you've thought, oh, maybe we're not thinking about that. Maybe we're missing that because we're thinking of ourselves as a coffee company versus a financial services company, or a telecom versus a health company. A good way to frame this question. There's one team from 2019, the First Ukrainian International Bank, that identified their company had up to $1 million USD in unused funds every year from closed bank accounts. So something that is pretty crazy. You think about the scale of $1 million, depending on the scale of bank, but identifying that missed opportunity and what you could be doing with it, whether you're re-engaging with the bank account owners or thinking about using it as an asset to connect back with them. And then our last question here, in order to achieve our priority SDGs by 2030, what would we need to do? And this again is starting to kind of drift into the solutioning frame of mind, but you don't have to solve it here. We're not asking for you to figure out the silver bullet, but as you've gone through these questions and the rest of the exercises today, what do you think are some of the solutions here to achieve those priority SDGs? And again, really narrowing in on those kind of 1, 2, or 3 that you've identified as priority, not boiling the ocean. And this is one I'd love to hear about too. Some of the kind of solutioning or high-level solutioning ideas you're starting to think about here, if anybody wants to share.
One that we've talked about is greater outreach in areas like, or organizations like Women Who Code, or see if there are some that are, by POC focused or differently abled services and that sort of thing for employment. Because if you're an engineer, right, you don't necessarily need to be able to do certain things, but as long as you can code, as long as you can do that, it doesn't really matter who you are. So really being able to actively search for those places would be a great start for us.
I love that. Systems thinking too, right? Tapping into your networks and other partners. Anybody else want to share what they're putting down here? What would have to get done to achieve your priority SDG by 2030?
One thing that came to my mind is to be self-sufficient with energy, or auto-sufficient in whatever operations you have, and I think that could apply to many industries. I think we see that today in the housing market, with in the houses being built disconnected from any gas grid or so, with with solar panels on the roof, and it's its own ecosystem of energy. So I would think that in the industrial world that will be replicated as well.
Yeah, how do you take that and scale it to an industrial level? Yeah. Awesome. Okay. So the next little piece that we have here, we're going to break out into our company teams and just start to go through some of the answers that you had for the questions. You'll notice in the template, there's notes down below. So if you need to reference the questions, they are just down below here, and what you were answering when you put it on the yellow sticky versus the purple one. So feel free to reference those. But just start to discuss between your teams, where did you guys have similar perspectives and similar answers? Where did you have different ones? Did you find more divergence between internal views, how you actually view your company versus external, so how you might view the market and landscape? And then any new questions for your challenge that the exercise has started to spark. Again, keeping that running list of questions that you need to find the answers to, or talk to somebody else to find the answers to. And then the last question here, I mentioned this for our last exercise too, but have you started to think about, okay, do we need to pivot at all? Are we still comfortable with where we're focused? Is there anything that we might need to shift around a little bit, just based on our new ideas, any new information you've learned? And then once you've kind of gone through that and understood, okay, where do our answers align? Where are they a little bit different? I'd challenge you to finish this how might we statement. And so it's the last slide on your activity statement or activity template slide. And you can actually just kind of copy and paste in the sticky notes that you were putting on your own individual templates and start to answer, what is your how might we statement? So that, we can achieve the SDGs. How might we establish decent wage across supply chain, through e-commerce, through purchasing, for our employees affected by maybe it's regulations or wage increases, and so you could help drive towards progress on SDG 1. So thinking through, okay, how do we start to string all these thoughts together and create what truly is that how might we statement, or that problem statement, as kind of the ultimate definition of your challenge. So any questions before we break out into groups?
Yeah, just one other thing I'd add to this, and I really like that last piece that Emma covered off around the difference between leaders and managers. And for the Innovators program that we're doing, it's very much about leading. not just copying what others are doing. It's not about getting the compliance correct in your organization. It's about being at the front of the pack. So that's why we spent so much time on the last camp, as well as the focus now around 10x change. It's really trying, and as you saw some of those examples already that were coming from the previous YSIP class and beyond, it's really how can you be at the forefront? How can you be the Elon Musk of catalyzing an industry where all the EV then providers like the Volkswagens of the world are then going to jump in and start following that. So I know that sounds ambitious, but I just want to kind of keep that leadership piece front of mind, for you to be the catalyst to come up with new breakthrough ways of driving impact and change, rather than just saying, hey, we can tweak a couple things around the edges and strengthen our inclusion and diversity training within our organization or our hiring. That's good, but what's better is transforming the industry and really setting the way that other companies can follow after you, both within your industry and beyond. So as you're going through that exercise, the how might we, please just take a chance to step back and say, are we getting bold enough? Will we be a leader? Will people be coming to us to say, wow, how did you crack that nut? Tell us more. And that's going to, be a good litmus test of saying, are you heading in the right direction? And of course, don't worry, just as Nate said yesterday, when we get into the piloting and the scoping, that's where you can start small and start innovating against it. But you're trying to develop something that's net new for the market and can really position you as leaders in the field.
That's great. I'll recall Team Cisco from 2018, their motto, if everyone agrees with what we are proposing, we aren't thinking big enough. I think that's a good place to start with your ambitious nature here. All right, let's break out. And we'll come back in about 30 minutes. Hello, everyone.
Hi.
All right. So how did that go? Does anybody want to share their how might we statement?
Oops.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I can share.
Great.
It's a big one. BSF is a very big company, so. But I think any action that we try and take under this heading will fit quite nicely. So how might we eliminate, reduce greenhouse gases through eliminating single-use plastics and or recycling and repurposing chemicals for BSF and the community as a whole affected by chemical waste streams so that we can produce and consume responsibly? Very big question. Wow. But it turned out to be something that made sense. I was impressed once we finished with the post-its.
Good, that's awesome. And how do you and the team feel about it? Do you feel like you're working in a space that kind of resonates and feel a little more comfortable with what that challenge is defined as?
Yeah, I think so. We always wanted SDG 12 as the chemical company. We wanted to really make an impact there. And the ideas that we've kind of been honing in on fit perfectly in this framework, I guess.
Awesome, that's great. All right, does anybody else want to share theirs?
You can go ahead.
Yeah, oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, Jacinta.
How might we hire diverse candidates through supporting diverse hiring practices for managers at Ascent affected by lack of diversity in the engineering supplier pool so that we can support equality?
Great, that's awesome. I know it sounds consistent with what you've been kind of playing with and what I've heard so far. How are you feeling? Do you feel like you have a more defined challenge now? You're playing in a space that you're comfortable with?
I think so. I think the main challenge now is going to be figuring out kind of that scope of, are we only looking at like supporting diverse hiring practices within Ascent, or are we now going to be looking at educating our people internally to make them be able to be developers, or are we looking more broadly at like supporting kids in elementary school so that we can have a more diverse set of engineers in the marketplace in 10 years? So like, it's a big problem that we can kind of, create a journey for over time.
Yeah, definitely. And those all feel like kind of three different pieces of a big overarching solution too, right? So I think if you don't have the answers to that yet, that's totally fine and not expected. Zoe, do you want to share yours?
Yep. How might we reduce our carbon intensity through our dynamic work spirit and new technologies for investors and society affected by climate change impacts and increased scrutiny, so that we can continue to provide energy to society?
Awesome. And I know I was in that group with Tori and you, but how are you feeling about it now?
Well, I think it puts nicely together an exercise that we've done in Camp 1, I believe. So yeah, it feels similar, although it's putting all the bits and pieces together.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Yeah, and that's a good point. You have those bits and pieces to pivot towards too, right? So if you get to the next camp and you're like, oh, this isn't quite right, you can always refer back to the things that we've done here and start to say, okay, maybe we want to change this part of the how might we, or the risk that we're facing. So that's great. Anybody else? I'd love to hear the how might we's from each company. So
I do apologize, Katie. It was just Katie and myself.
Oh.
So needless to say, we were just talking about everything and kind of other theories. So I'm sorry for not letting you do your homework.
I saw Ian looking a little sheepish. I was wondering what that was for.
Yeah, exactly. But I'm sure you, Katie, and Ben are going to pick this up offline as well. So, but just wanted to give you the pass because I was the disruption. But if you've got one, go for it.
Give me 2 seconds.
Cool. We can do another company and come back.
Yeah. Does anybody else want to share? Even if you don't have it put in that perfect sentence yet, sharing maybe some of the sticky notes that really resonated across that last exercise.
For ours, so we spent a lot of time talking to Daria about like just really digging into things, but so this might not be where things land, but we're thinking about how might we provide reliable zero carbon connectivity through our nationwide infrastructure, and thinking about that more broadly, like yes, cell sites, but also various network facilities and offices for currently underserved communities. That's to be defined, affected by climate change, so that they can continue to stay connected no matter where they are.
Awesome. That's great. And I think that's, again, totally fine to have pieces that you want to narrow in on or get more detailed, but like starting with that is, yeah, it sounds great. Anybody else? Who are we missing here? Do you want another minute or two, Katie, or anything you want to share?
Yeah, this is not as succinct as everybody else's, but through the conversation with Ian, I think the scope might have expanded somewhat. So what I've got so far is, how might we be energy self-sufficient? I really like Zoe's quote from earlier. How might we be energy self-sufficient and carbon zero through green energy for our company and our community that we work within, affected by unreliable and increasingly expensive energy, so that we can reduce our impact on the climate, reduce our energy use, and continue to produce sustainable gold in a company that our employees are proud to work for, and that we give lasting value to the communities we work within and with.
Incredible. 1 minute to put together that.
Yes. I do apologize for the 95% or 95% of the time anchor that I gave you there, Katie, but you pulled through on the crunch. Innovation at its best.
Awesome. So just maybe an overall kind of pulse check. How are people feeling? Do we think over the last 2 days that we've gotten a clearer vision or a clearer idea of what the challenge will be? Maybe it's not perfect, but if you're feeling good, maybe give the thumbs up emoji or a reaction there. And feeling okay, maybe in the middle, really lost. I have no clue what my challenge is. I'm going back to 17 goals. All right, so I saw a couple thumbs in the middle. That's great. Awesome. Okay, and then the other thing I just wanted to check in on as well is over the last 2 days, we've gone through a ton of material, a lot of different exercises and frameworks for how to approach our thinking. I'd love to hear which ones kind of resonated with you the most or you found most helpful to go through in terms of getting to a more clear challenge. Any favorites?
I'm finding it hard to specifically point at like a method, but just the relentless focus on thinking bigger, thinking bigger, thinking bigger. So like beyond how do we hire more diversely and more into the you know, how do we create more female engineers or by POC engineers and so on. And listening to the groups that we've already, like the 2 case studies yesterday and today of how those problems were solved kind of in this really macro place rather than just in the company level was really cool to get a sense of just the possible scope that we could be looking at here.
Yeah, that's great. What about any exercises that were a little more sticky, a little more challenging to get through? Confusing?
I just wanted to add, I like the exercise on the business models to think about those, because typically you wouldn't think about applying it or totally different business model, or maybe you would think about 1 or 2, but to go through a whole range of different business models and being forced to think about that is thought triggering.
Awesome.
Yeah, I agree. I really liked learning about the business models and haven't, really done anything about that before. And also actually on reflection, that the last thing we did with the sticky notes, I was really confused at the beginning and actually having then tried to put it together in that sentence, I'm going to go back and redo the sticky notes because I think that is actually forcing how does, the whole thing, how does it affect who, all this sort of thing. So I think actually that's quite useful. And the examples, the 2 people that we had, Lindsay and Nate, really, eye-opening, like just said.
Yeah, they were great. Awesome. All right. Well, with that, maybe I'll turn it back to Steve and Daria to wrap things up.
Sure, thanks. Daria, did you have anything to say before I get into the wrap up?
No, go ahead, Stu.
Okay, my screen sharing, right?
Yep.
Awesome. Let me tap over to that. Yeah, so during the wrap up, I'll talk a little bit about the content we covered today and some of the next steps coming up before the next camp. And after that, we're actually gonna stay on the call, maybe have like a little bit of a networking or open office kind of segment after that. So yeah, just to recap the day a bit, we started off with a live case study presentation by Lindsay Verhage from Nutrien discussing breakthrough business models. Nutrien strives to balance social, economic, and environmental impacts, and a sustainable business model is the strong foundation for that. So in her cake example, with values at the bottom, core strategies and commitments, governance from a top-down and bottom-up approach, employing an SDG challenge, ESG committee, etc., then having a strong purpose-driven culture at the top, with the icing on the cake being the SDGs. There's an importance to the proof of concept and piloting sustainable commitments before launching and scaling, and that showed itself with a ripple effect in agriculture. Nutrien is utilizing a collaborative approach, engaging with multiple stakeholders, partners, community relations, benchmarking indexes, supply chain resilience, and shared values. Nutrien also encourages creating a value balancing alliance, so moving away from profit maximization and towards value optimization by taking responsibility for the impact of your actions. And finally, increasing employee awareness and engagement campaigns by using sustainability as the lens to execute their business model through a course campaign and by increasing communication. Next, we moved into a brief creativity exercising by Daria, highlighting the interesting potential and even seemingly benign items like a paperclip before getting into the segment on how to define your SDG business challenge. Emma gave us an overview of how to define your SDG business challenge by thinking particularly about scope, ambition, and validation. Scope involves narrowing down the focus and aligning both your company's vision, your company's mission and sustainability strategy. Another key aspect is presenting your challenge in innovative ways in relation to the risks or threats that your company may have in the future. Ambition, which there needs to be enough of to have breakthrough impact, but not too much because as you refine your challenge, it must stay achievable. And validation, which involves engaging with stakeholders to validate your scope and ambition. This is done through taking the opportunity to listen to and learn through open-ended questions from a diverse group of stakeholders. An example of that is Rotoplas engaging with a variety of stakeholders to address water needs, ultimately launching INWA, an international platform to connect talent and address water needs. Then Emma led us through some exercises during the challenge lab, including using a matrix to avoid risks and leverage opportunities, turning liabilities into assets by thinking about closed loops, for example, thinking beyond a more inclusive hiring policy and about retention as well. Raising the ambition and thinking about which aspects could benefit from a 10 times approach, being multiplicative in your thinking rather than incremental, disrupting the market or yourself by thinking about elements of core business we need to let go of, or what the future of your industry could even look like. And by establishing leadership, for example, solving a global challenge through core businesses and understanding blind spots or missed opportunities. So a couple next steps. Like always, we'll share the rough recordings pretty much right away with you of these camps. You know, for anyone who missed a day or missed some parts of this, and we'll later on then provide the unlisted YouTube videos, which will be edited once we have them uploaded. Then you'll get the slide content as well. And it seems from the polls we did today that most of you came into this camp feeling much better prepared, are doing okay with Innovators Lab, are enjoying the content, and nobody answered that they're feeling too uncomfortable with the Challenge Lab. So there's great results overall, but there's also a desire for more supplementary reading material and a larger connection with the other Innovators teams. So we've collected some of the supplementary reading links from Ian and Yama through the days, and we'll be sharing those with you again. But we're also going to consult them and get some direction on how to deliver that extra material in a guided way. And we'll also take a look at getting you more connected with the US network in particular, like we mentioned at the start of the day. I think that will be helpful. There's a few things that we'll remind you probably by email again or messages on the Innovators Lab to go through. At the end of each camp, there's a Google Forms workshop survey, which we'll send to you. You should refer to your work plan again, that document from the end of the first camp, with your team to identify next steps and finalizing your challenge. You should get on a call with your mentor, and we'll again email you like specifics about what should probably be covered in that call, but you ultimately want to prepare for a meeting with your champion for to achieve some kind of challenge validation. So yeah, and also if you haven't yet, I think you've all uploaded your challenges on the Innovators Lab. You might want to reiterate that as well. So keep that in mind, and we'll keep you posted on with more communications next week on that. The next tentative camp date time we have is June 3rd and 4th, where we'll be covering breakthrough technologies, idea generation, and prototyping. So thanks, everyone. Thank you, Accenture, as always, for the wonderful facilitation, Ian and Emma. Thanks to Daria and Nada as well for everything they do for this program. And of course, you, the mentors for attending, and you, the innovators, for making this possible. And yeah, back to you, Daria, if you want to talk about the next part.
Thanks. So we just wanted to open up what we'll call open office hours. If anyone wants to talk to us in a bit more with a bit more length about some of their challenges, some of the ideas that you're thinking about, anything essentially that we've covered in the last 2 camps, we're happy to stay on the call for an extra half an hour and talk to anyone about any of these things. We can also do breakout rooms if for anyone who's interested in networking. So, let us know in the chat if you'd want to stay and speak with us if we want to talk about your challenge specifically. For anyone who would like to network with some of the other innovators on the call, we can also set up breakout rooms for that as well.
Yeah, we'd basically be doing this in the pub if we were in person. So please also, for those, I guess, out in Vancouver, maybe not a drink unless you want to have an early weekend, but really just a chance for us to have a bit more of a casual conversation, explore those ideas as well. And one other thing I would just say, based on Steve's very strong closing, as you saw, we've just scratched the surface on so many topics. So we've got those resources. You're already seeing the synergies between the groups. So hopefully now, after 2 camps of seeing familiar faces, you'll be able to, if you haven't already, you'll be able to reach out to them to have a chat and say, hey, what were you doing about the transition for energy for your site? And how does a TELUS idea link into the Golden Star idea? All that kind of conversation as you're going through this. And then, of course, if there's more questions that emerge around some of these techniques that we talked about, or tools or resources, do feel free to reach out. But just wanted to cover that off. And, I guess if folks are leaving, huge thanks, to everyone. I mean, it was a really engaging session, from our side. As you know, I get a tiny bit passionate about this stuff, and just so inspiring to hear all of your wonderful ideas and seeing the kind of impact that you want to be driving in your organizations and more broadly within the sector.
Okay, thanks everyone. We'll leave the call open again, like as mentioned. And if you think of any questions while we still have mentors and Accenture here, feel free. Yeah. And like Ian said, we can even put you into breakout rooms if you just want to talk with someone about your challenge in specific.
Cool. And for anyone who's leaving, have a wonderful weekend.
Yeah. Did I have my camera off that whole time?
Steve or Daria, is there a way to send a private message to somebody? I guess I could just ask my question. Katie, are you staying? I know it's nighttime for you where you are.
Yeah, I can stay for a bit. I was also going to ask, has anybody actually got in touch with their mentor yet? And sort of how did you go about having, what did you talk about?
We have a call. We were supposed to talk to our mentor, and then the scheduling didn't work out, so we haven't actually synced up yet. But I think our goal was to better understand her expertise and share our preliminary idea.
Yeah, we're gonna put more attention into that in the coming weeks, because there's a bigger break now between the next camp to get everyone caught up. Finally, I think we'll put more emphasis on making sure that these calls with the mentor are happening. But every team should have been introduced by now to your mentor and asked to schedule a call. But always, let us know if you're having difficulties arranging that, because we'll get to the bottom of it and make sure that you get your time with them. And yeah, if you want to send a message to someone, Stephanie, if you in the chat you see where you type your message, above that, the 2, you can just change it to a direct message to someone if you want.
I only have the 2 options: everyone or you.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's not enabled for us,
Oh.
unfortunately, to message other people.
Yeah, we tried to do that as well during the call, but couldn't. So maybe it's something we try for next time if Zoom does it.
Yeah, I'll look into that. Maybe it's a security thing.
And just to build on what Steve was saying earlier, because there is, you know, a good portion of time between now and the next camp, you should be meeting with your mentor probably about closer to 3 to 4 times between now and the next camp. So bi-weekly calls, we'll be like elaborating on what Steve said. I'll be getting in touch with the mentors as well. We'll be working closer with your champions as well. So as Steve said, it's really going to be important for you to sit down with your champion and really sort of iron out the details of your challenge and really understand the prioritization element, you know, for that the champion has in mind. And so that's going to be a really integral component. And then of course the mentors, once you've validated at least, you know, the direction for your challenge with your champion, the mentors will really help you over the course of the next 2 months to build on the ideas that have been explored by Ian and Emma today, and Ian and Veronique the last camp that we had. So it's going to be a really busy 2 weeks. When we come into solutions development for the next camp, we're really going to be focusing on outlining what the solutions look like, and you will not be able to really answer a lot of those questions if you don't have a streamlined version of your challenge. So it'll be really integral to sort of narrow this focus down between now and June. And so we'll be working with you behind the scenes. We'll be getting in touch with the mentors, but yes, 3 to 4 times is roughly what you should be aiming to meet up with your mentor and really touch base on the progress you're making over the next couple months.
So what should we have exactly going into the next camp? Like, do you, I guess it's a separate question, but are there like examples of the detail needed for the challenge? Like, I know every company's different and industry's different. I just, where do we need to be come June 3rd and 4th?
So I believe we share those materials, and Steve is doing a pretty great job of, you know, sharing the camp materials ahead of time. If you haven't access to the folders, please do take a look. We will share the materials of the next camp ahead of time. I think it's a really good idea, if, you know, if you actually review the material going into the sessions, into the camp sessions themselves, because then it provides you a little bit more context with what Ian and his team will be talking about at greater length. I also find that if you review the material beforehand, you'll feel a little bit more comfortable and confident to, I guess, share during these camp sessions, because, you know, it's important for us to be able to hear where you're coming from and sort of your thoughts about a lot of the content that we're sharing. We know it's very content heavy and content rich, and perhaps for some of you it's really, you know, new information coming to light. So the earlier you get a chance to review the materials and really like consider what, you know, the questions they're asking and what the files are sharing, it'll sort of better prepare you for the camps themselves.
Yeah, and just to be clear on that, Daria and Steve, so at a minimum, I assume that 1-page how might we statement will be the building block. And then of course, having some additional detail or insights around some of those elements. Is there anything else that needs to be done kind of as homework before the next camp? Because I appreciate, you know, the previewing what's going to be next, but just thinking of David's question around, you know, whether there's a template or other things they need to make sure that are considered.
Yeah, the main thing I would point to is on the Innovators Lab, there's pre-reading materials that if you don't really like take the time to look at, you might not know going into some of like the breakout rooms, like everything that you could ahead of time on the topics, because especially if we're shifting gears and starting to move into solutions soon, it's good to like recap on that if you've missed any, but also, like, there's reference in a lot of the slide deck material presented here to like that's brief, but is covered more extensively in the, you know, like the pre-reading materials on the lab, whether it's in the videos or the documents attached. And like I think I've mentioned before, that it's mostly kept fairly concise there, with the option to read more. But like there's a baseline that's that like if you don't take the chance to look at before the camps, you probably won't have as strong of a understanding, no matter how well it's delivered by Ian and Emma or Veronique or whoever else is here during the camp itself.
Yeah, so I'd say really doubling down, David, on the 1-pager. And then, you know, maybe if you're starting to put some more details and contours around what that idea is, some of the research that you're going to be, because exactly as Daria and Steve have said, we're going to introduce new content but it's just about really refining and tightening and that kind of agile approach that we talked about to get more clarity and specificity on some of the open questions. And then of course, as we add more content, you'll see how it kind of attaches to the concept you're developing. We'll also take a look kind of afterwards to see if there's any other material that we can highlight around saying that I always kind of think of final deliverable. I'm a consultant, so what's the end product at the end of this journey, and how do we work back from it? So we can look at any of those templates that are going to be most relevant for you as well, just to help you kind of on that journey.
The other thing I'd add that's less template oriented, because I think Ian has a great point, like the culmination of all these activities was that how might we statement, so refining that. And kind of the three things that I might call out to do as well that were in some of the presentation materials. So looking at your company's mission and vision and how it relates back to your how might we statement, your company's sustainability strategy and any specific targets, and then also stakeholder consultations. I'd say just kind of looking forward and looking towards what we were able to do today. That was the one that you're able to come up with the questions. Obviously, we couldn't do the interviews today. So I think stakeholder consultations to start validating, whether that's with your mentor and champion to start, but going beyond that, I think is a good way to just validate your challenge before starting to solution for it.
Okay. Yeah, that's a lot of good feedback. I didn't expect everybody to chime in. That's great.
Yeah.
Okay, good. There is time before June, so all of that sounds very plausible. I have energy. I want to know where to put it. So that was very helpful.
Yeah, great question.
Just following on from that, when you say the kind of the recommended reading and this sort of thing, I think I've just found it, because I've definitely missed quite a bit of that. Is it just all in the library section of the Innovators Lab? Is that where it's all put? And is the library generic for all of the global compacts? Because I'm not sure whether the stuff that you've been sort of saying we'll put this here or there, is that like unique to our group of people as opposed to the USA group or whatever?
I'm gonna share my screen. It might be easier. Let me know when you can see.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. So when we send like follow-up emails to you, like I try to hyperlink to make it as easy as possible to follow along with like where there's different things, because obviously like we have like shared drive folders that we're giving you with like camp slide material, and we have recordings, and then like I'm talking about Innovators Lab content. What I was meaning is just I know you're all on this now, the Innovators Lab. When you log in here, you can see as like we're moving through the phases, there's these sections like with onboarding, challenge identification, challenge definition, and then like there's going to be solutions content coming up probably fairly soon. If you click on one of these, it will bring you to a page with some videos that you can click through to introduce some concepts that would be covered in the upcoming camp. And then there's drop downs here for pre-reading materials. This is what I linked to this morning that discussed the business models, in case just because I heard some innovators had missed this, like giving the examples of the 6, because like, and that's what I mean when I say that no matter how well of a job our facilitators do during, they only have so much time to cover this kind of stuff in depth, whereas like understanding and having a grasp beforehand can help you. And then like for those who like to learn by, just trying to engage with it a little bit more, there's questions here about your thoughts on the content. I don't think this there's no like grading to this or anything, like any worry about the right or wrong answers, but you can fill out questions about that are designed to make you think about the videos or reading material. And then underneath that, there's recommended resources. Besides this, we also have like the material from Accenture and so on, that and like other areas that is like recommended but not as required. So like it's not as important that you look at this, but if you have time, yeah, there's going to be additional documents that you can find there. Was that okay?
Yeah, okay. So the additional documents from Accenture and the PowerPoints, they're in the additional info.
No, the PowerPoints I just share with you in hyperlink through through emails. That's the fastest way you'll get them. But like by Monday, you'll get an email from myself or someone who will share that with you like pretty much right away to check the PowerPoints. But like Daria mentioned, we're actually going to share probably as much of the camp content as we can ahead of time for the next one, if you want to look at that too. I know some of the mentors were curious to look at to even look at like the slides ahead of time, and we can provide that for you.
Cool, thanks. And on the kind of what we need for next time, there was quite a lot of information I was just trying to take on then. So I guess the culmination of this with this statement, if we go back and kind of process everything and really make sure that that statement is pretty well defined, what do you then mean by kind of validation of the statement? Like, because I'm wondering, you know, we can go to our champions and then start talking about how valid is the challenge, but also, you know, then looking, if we say the challenge is this big, you know, how can we then not scare them into thinking, well, the problem's even the solution is never going to be achievable? Like, I'm not quite sure about what validation of the challenge means.
So that's in reference to some of the content covered today about here, let me pull up again if I can.
And one example as well, Katie, we kind of started discussing this, and it was saying, is there an energy glut? And it's you know, a penny for 100 megawatts of power. If that was the case, then of course we got to go back and rethink the challenge. So I think there's some of those high level elements around saying, if you were testing out around the shift to renewable energy for the Ghana site, are there any major showstoppers, and what could those be? And so I think the price of energy would be a great showstopper of saying there's no point of solving a problem if it already, you know, if the economics are just going to really blow it away. So those are kind of more the mega ones of saying, is it legitimate? But you can keep the ambition going. You don't need to assess the total size or quantity of what it's going to be. But what are some of those really, really big things that you want to get your head around, just to say, yeah, this feels right. And even as you were mentioning, you know, chatting with your line manager or your boss and sponsor, you know, testing this out and saying, does this make sense? Testing it out with, you know, maybe some other folks at the Ghana site of saying, yes, does this make sense? Have they tried things there? Just to say, yeah, actually, there could be some momentum and there could be some interest there. And appreciate, you know, people won't buy in because it's a long sales cycle, but they could say, yeah, that seems like a legitimate problem for us to be solving. That's the kind of reassurance we'd be looking at.
Mm-hmm.
Gotcha. Yeah.
And Katie, when we were covering the how to define your SDG business challenge, when Emma was going through that, maybe you can look at the slide deck again, or there's a recording, of course, to reference. But part of how that segment was structured was around going over the scope of your challenge, going over the ambition behind your challenge, and then they're kind of combined in the validation part. And the idea is that maybe once you have a stronger understanding of this, with help, like with calls with your mentor maybe as well, we'd like to get you to the point where you can approach and have conversations with your champion about your challenge with an understanding of like, and like the validating your challenge to them, like based on it like making sense from like a scope and ambition standpoint as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so just doing the research and having the sort of stats to back up the challenge being a problem, to then say this is why we should go and solve it.
Yeah, there's a bunch of factors that need to be balanced here to have like the strongest approach possible.
Okay, thanks.
Hey, Steve, can I ask a question? I'm just checking Darlene Dam's session. There might just be an error here. But regarding the time, because if you download the link, it's 3 o'clock Eastern, but in the text, it's 8 o'clock Central. So or maybe it was Central European time.
Yeah, if you adjust for whatever time zone that's in, is it okay now?
The CAT is the Central European time. Okay, gotcha. Yep, so we're good. We're good. That makes sense. So I guess when people download it, they'll get localized just to make sure they show up in the right place. Good.
All right, I'm going to sign off. Thanks, everyone. Have a good weekend.
You too.
Hey, have a great weekend.
Same for me. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for your questions.
Right.
Bye, everyone. Have a great weekend.
Bye.
Bye, Emma. Thanks for joining.
Thanks, Emma.
Excellent.
I just had one final question. Sorry, I've almost got the questions. Dory, you mentioned
Thanks for joining so late, Katie. It's shows
really,
real dedication.
Interesting. Dory, you mentioned you were going to contact the mentors. So we, Arbiner and I did meet with our mentor, and he wasn't really sure what the scope was or kind of what was going on. I just wondered whether you were providing any, well, it'd be great if you could provide like the slide decks and stuff to them. I think, it was a really interesting conversation, but that's why I was interested to know how everybody else had approached their conversations, because I didn't know where to start. And we had to do quite a bit of backtracking, which was fine because it was helpful for us to talk through stuff, but I still don't really have a clue what's going on, properly. So, and I really want to take the time between now and the next camp to go through everything, because I think I've got a bit more understanding.
Yeah, no problem. We will be having more, we've had initial conversations with the mentors after they were accepted into the program to talk about what the project is about and how we see and how the program has envisioned mentors helping out the innovator teams. I think now that we've had the first 2 camps, and some of the innovator teams have had a chance to meet, some of them haven't yet, scheduling issues, things like that. Approaching the mentors again now that we have a more defined scope, now we'll really tell them, okay, this is what you should be looking at for each of the innovator teams that you're working with. If they're struggling with a specific element of their challenge, this is how you're meant to guide them. We also need them to, they'll be coming back to us and providing us with details with, based on their expertise, where they think, are some strengths and some weaknesses, and how they'll be able to help the teams going forward. And then after that initial conversation, it'll be great to see, based on what we discuss, how this is sort of enabled with the future conversations. As I'd mentioned on the call before, there should be about 3 to 4 meetings with your mentor before the next camp. And so, there should be that more symbiotic relationship between mentor and teams. We will be also sharing the, if we haven't already, so again, I'm not sure if the mentors have had a chance to look at it, but I know that we've given them access to the materials. So they are, Steve can elaborate a bit more. They shouldn't be in the dark. They know what we're working on. They know the materials that are being provided to the, the cohort that have been designed by UN Global Compact. And then of course, if they're also capable of providing their own materials if they have additional supplementary reading that they think would be able to help the teams. Steve, go ahead. You were going to elaborate.
No, there's nothing more to add really. The mentors have have access to everything that the innovators do, including like the innovators lab and the content. They even get it ahead of time before the innovators. So we'd love to hear feedback like that. If a mentor's in the dark, that's the kind of thing that now that we have a larger gap between camps, maybe it'll take Daria's special touch, but we'll make sure to act on that feedback and make sure that the mentors are able to, give some guided direction to the innovator teams. So we'll get on that for sure.
Okay, cool. Thanks. Yeah.
Appreciate your question, Katie. Anytime you have any additional feedback, or if you've experienced one thing, your experience with your mentor will be completely different than the other innovator teams and their mentors. So we will rely on you to provide this critical feedback for us, because we're ultimately trying to improve the program as we go along. Not just that, hey, this is great feedback for next year. No, there's still 4 months of program left. We want to be able to fix as much of this as we can, and so the program can really be almost like a brand new polished program by the end of the first year. So feel free to share with us at any time, any challenges or, confusion you might have. If you're not sure where to access the materials, even if you've asked us before, I'd rather you ask me again and we just, hey, it's right here. Here's the direct link. Don't feel bad about bothering us. You're not bothering us. We're here to assist as best as we can. So any question you might have, even if it's 3 in the morning, don't worry about it. Just send it over and we'll address it as best as possible.
We might not respond at 3 in the morning, but it will definitely go to the inbox for sure.
Thanks. I would just say, like, the last 2 days have been amazing. Like I think the key is starting to turn a bit more for me, and put it into place. And I think maybe last time I was just so overwhelmed with so much information, it was perhaps a little long. but compared to the organization of the sections have been really good, and they've seemed like quite clear sections.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks for that, Katie. And I guess another piece of input is you're kind of in the fishbowl right now. One of the choices that we made was these are supposed to be 2 full days, right? And we're trying to do it virtual, and that's why it was pretty exhausting last time. So what the trade-off was, we cut it into 2 half days ish this time with 2 4 to 5 hour slots, but we had to canter through the content a lot quicker. And then cut it. So did you find even with a shorter timeline, we should stick with the 4-hour sprints to kind of get folks going? Or do you think trying to get a bit more time, or how could you, and again, I appreciate it's a personal perspective, but I'm just thinking the 8 versus the 4.
I found it easier to I guess one of the things that I struggled with last time compared to this time was it was easier for me to kind of compartmentalize the sections and understand what each section was trying to get at. But I think last time, and that's why I kind of want to go back to it, because I think because it was just all so new, it probably would have been, even if it was a 2-hour session, I would have been like, what just happened? So I think this section two sessions I was able to understand more, what the journey that I was being taken through, and maybe that was because it was shorter. Sorry, does that answer your question?
No, that's great, and appreciate of course it's getting used to it, a new group of folks. Now you're getting familiar with friends across the other innovator teams and us, and then of course now that we're getting more structure into a challenge. All the content needs somewhere to latch onto, so it should become a bit more clear. And then we just don't want to oversweat it, because there's just more of a design question we've been kind of thinking about, which is less breaks and get people home quicker, especially with some of the time zones, versus longer day, more working sessions. Would that go well? So
yeah, I thought the different types of workings today and yesterday were good, in that you were almost taking the post-it thing, we were all doing it individually, but you were taking through it with enough time for us actually to do it by ourselves and think, and then come back and discuss it, and then a combination of like doing it with companies, those kind of different working sessions were good, and having a mix of who we're talking to, because I think everyone's getting a bit more familiar with themselves, and I'm always guilty of talking too much, but I want to hear everybody else's opinion. So I think, for whatever reason that people aren't sharing as much, it's easier to share when you're talking with people one-on-one, and getting a good conversation going.
Yeah, it was interesting. And what were your thoughts? Who was your mixed group with? It was that was with TELUS, was it? When we had the 2 companies yesterday.
Oh gosh, Andrea from.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Ascent.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then last session I was with Matrix 360, who I don't think were here this time, but just totally different perspectives, which is what we're here for.
Yeah. No, that's interesting, because we're trying to figure out how do we get as much diversity and engagement in a virtual environment as possible, because I'm sure if we were in person,
you guys are doing a good job.
it's hard because all the good value is going to happen when we're not having a formal session as well. I mean, there's of course core content delivery, but it's the chats and the connecting the dots I find that really helps. So hopefully the narrative is going to happen behind over the next couple of months as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll think if I've got any other feedback and let you know. But yeah, it's like you guys are doing a great job. I think it's a really hard job trying to facilitate all of this in this format. Yeah. I think I don't mind the like 15-minute breaks to actually, and it being slightly longer. Personally, I think that's helpful because I can just like do a bit of firefighting on emails and then come back and actually feel like, okay, that's what I did and that's what I learned, and then next section.
Awesome.
Yeah. Cool. Right, I'm gonna go and let you guys all go, and I'm gonna have my dinner.
Thanks.
Excellent. We'll have a lovely weekend ahead, and thanks for all the great contributions last couple of days.
Thanks so much.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye, Katie.